Some voices carry farther than they should. Granite Peak rises 12,807 feet above sea level, making it the highest point in Montana and one of the most technically demanding summits in the lower 48 states. Located in the Absaroka-Beartooth Wilderness, the peak sits at the heart of a landscape carved by ancient glaciers, surrounded by cirques, knife-edge ridges, and snowfields that persist well into summer. The nearest paved road lies more than 20 miles away. The nearest town, Red Lodge, has a population that has never exceeded 3,000. The mountain was first successfully climbed in 1923 by Ehlers Koch and a small party of Forest Service employees. Since then, it has claimed at least 14 lives, most from falls, a few from exposure, and 2 from causes that were never definitively established. The peak is not haunted in any traditional sense. There are no ghost stories, no local legends warning climbers away, but there is a particular quality to the silence at high altitude that veterans of the range describe as heavy, as though the air itself is listening. The Absaroka-Beartooth Wilderness covers nearly 1 million acres of roadless terrain. Large portions remain unmapped in any meaningful detail. Satellite coverage in 1967 was limited to military reconnaissance, and civilian GPS would not exist for another 3 decades. In that era, surveying teams still relied on triangulation, barometric altimeters, and line-of-sight radio communication. They worked in conditions that modern climbers would consider primitive, and they accepted risks that would violate every contemporary safety protocol. It was under these circumstances that a 4-person team from the United States Geological Survey arrived at Granite Peak in late December of 1967. The team consisted of Harold Whitmore, age 42, the senior surveyor and expedition leader; David Kaminsky, age 31, a geophysicist specializing in magnetic anomalies; Eleanor Vance, age 28, a cartographer on her 3rd Beartooth assignment; and Thomas Reyes, age 35, the radio operator and logistics coordinator. Their mission was to establish geodetic control points for an updated topographic map of the region, a routine task that required precise measurements taken from multiple elevations. They established base camp at approximately 11,200 feet on December 28th and spent the following 2 days ascending to a secondary camp just below the summit ridge. The weather was clear but bitterly cold, with nighttime temperatures dropping to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Radio contact with their support team in Red Lodge was maintained on a 6-hour schedule. On the evening of December 31st, the team settled into their tents to wait out the final hours of the year. None of them had planned to celebrate. There was no champagne, no countdown, no acknowledgement of the occasion beyond a brief notation in Kaminsky's field journal: New Year's Eve, wind picking up, hoping for clear skies tomorrow. At approximately 11:47 p.m., Whitmore emerged from his tent to check the weather. He would later describe what happened next in a sworn statement to Forest Service investigators. "I heard voices," he said, "not 1 or 2 a crowd. They were counting. I could hear them clearly. 10, 9, 8, going down like you'd hear at a party." Whitmore woke the others. By the time they were outside, the counting had reached 4. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, not from below, not from above, but from the air itself, as though the sound was being generated by the mountain. At the stroke of midnight, they heard the word 1, followed by what Vance described as something like applause, but muffled, like it was coming through water. Then silence. Reyes immediately attempted to radio base camp. The transmission began normally, but within seconds, it was interrupted by the same voices now speaking in unison, repeating the countdown from 10. The recording, preserved on magnetic tape at the Red Lodge relay station, runs for 43 seconds before cutting to static. It has never been released to the public. Eleanor Vance refused to speak about the incident for nearly 30 years. When she finally agreed to an interview in 1994, she was living in Tucson and had not returned to Montana since her retirement from the USGS in 1978. "We weren't scared at first," she said. "We thought it was some kind of radio bleed, maybe a broadcast from Billings bouncing off the ionosphere. That happens sometimes. But then Harold pointed out that the voices were coming from outside, not from the radio, from the mountain. She paused before continuing. David tried to explain it. He said it might be some kind of acoustic phenomenon, sound waves trapped in the rock, released by temperature changes. He said the Swiss had documented something similar in the Alps. But he didn't sound convinced. None of us were. Thomas Reyes died in 1982 from complications related to a stroke. Before his death, he gave a single interview to a journalist from the Billings Gazette who was researching a story on unexplained incidents in the Beartooth Range. The story was never published. According to the journalist's notes, which were donated to the Montana Historical Society in 2004, Reyes described the voices as too perfect. He said they sounded rehearsed, synchronized in a way that no spontaneous crowd could achieve. It was like listening to a recording, he said. But recordings don't come from the sky. David Kaminsky submitted a detailed report to the USGS in January 1968, proposing that the incident might be explained by a rare form of acoustic refraction combined with atmospheric ducting. His theory suggested that sound waves from a distant New Year's celebration, possibly in Red Lodge or even Billings, had been channeled through a temperature inversion layer and amplified by the concave shape of the surrounding cirques. The theory was reviewed by 3 independent acousticians. 2 found it plausible but unprovable. The third, a professor at MIT named Gerald Forsyth, wrote a 1-page response that was never included in the official file. A copy was discovered in Kaminsky's personal papers after his death in 2001. The proposed mechanism cannot account for the clarity or directionality of the sound as described by witnesses, Forsyth wrote. Acoustic refraction produces diffuse, distorted audio. It does not produce synchronized speech. Whatever the source of this phenomenon, it was not atmospheric. The Forest Service conducted its own investigation in February 1968. A team of 4 rangers retraced the surveyor's route and spent 2 nights at the secondary camp. They reported nothing unusual. Their final assessment, filed under case number FSMT 68041, concluded that the incident was likely the result of auditory hallucination induced by altitude, fatigue, and cold. The magnetic tape recording was sent to the National Archives in 1971, where it was classified as a natural phenomenon of undetermined origin. Requests to access the recording under the Freedom of Information Act have been denied on 3 separate occasions, most recently in 2017. The stated reason is ongoing scientific analysis, though no analysis has been published. Harold Whitmore never climbed again. He transferred to a desk position in Denver and retired in 1984. In a letter to a former colleague, written in 1991, he reflected on the incident with unusual candor. "I've spent 23 years trying to forget what I heard," he wrote. "But every New Year's Eve, I stay awake until midnight. I tell myself I'm just being cautious. But the truth is, I'm listening. I'm waiting to hear if they're still counting." No other incidents have been reported from Granite Peak on New Year's Eve. The secondary camp used by the 1967 team has never been reoccupied. Rangers who patrol the area describe it as unremarkable, just another high-altitude shelf of rock and ice, indistinguishable from a dozen others in the range. But the original radio log from December 31, 1967, contains a final entry that was not included in any official report. It was discovered by a graduate student reviewing archived communications in 2012. The entry, timed at 12:17 a.m., reads simply, "Signal received. Source unknown. Voices still present. Awaiting confirmation." No confirmation was ever recorded. The voices, wherever they came from, had already finished counting. The ice remembers what the water forgets. East Rosebud Lake lies at the end of a 14-mile gravel road in Carbon County, Montana, tucked into a glacial valley at the northeastern edge of the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. The lake stretches nearly 2 miles in length and reaches depths of over 100 feet in its central basin. It is fed by snowmelt from the surrounding peaks and drained by East Rosebud Creek, which eventually joins the Stillwater River before emptying into the Yellowstone. The area has been inhabited, in one form or another, for at least 10,000 years. Crow and Blackfeet peoples used the valley as a seasonal hunting ground, though permanent settlement was rare due to the harsh winters. European-American homesteaders arrived in the late 1800s, drawn by rumors of gold in the nearby mountains. The gold never materialized in significant quantities, but the lake remained cold, deep, and largely unchanged by the centuries. By the 1970s, East Rosebud had become a modest destination for ice fishing. The lake freezes reliably by mid-December, and its population of brook trout and Arctic grayling draws a small but dedicated group of anglers each winter. Most are locals from Red Lodge or Absaroka. A few drive up from Billings. They set up portable shelters on the ice, drill their holes, and wait in the silence that only frozen water can provide. It was in this silence, on New Year's Eve, 1982, that the lights were first observed. Raymond Halvorsen, a retired electrician from Red Lodge, was fishing alone near the northern shore when he noticed a faint glow moving beneath the ice approximately 60 yards from his position. He initially assumed it was a reflection, perhaps headlights, from a vehicle on the access road, but the light was amber, not white, and it was moving in a direction perpendicular to the shore. Halvorsen watched for nearly 4 minutes as the glow traveled south, maintaining a consistent depth and speed. It was followed by a second light, then a third, then at least a dozen more, each spaced roughly 10 feet apart. The procession moved in single file, curving slightly as it approached the lake's outlet before fading entirely. He told no one for 3 days. When he finally mentioned it to his brother-in-law, a Carbon County Sheriff's deputy named Oscar Meindl, he was surprised to learn that 2 other fishermen had reported similar sightings that same night. The following New Year's Eve, Halvorsen returned to the lake with Meindl and 3 other men. They positioned themselves at intervals along the northern shore and waited. At 11:43 p.m., the lights appeared again, same location, same trajectory, same amber color. This time, they counted 19 individual glows before the procession ended. Margaret Yellowtail was the first to drill through the ice directly above the lights. A member of the Crow Nation and a lifelong resident of the Rosebud Valley, Yellowtail had heard about the phenomenon from her nephew, who worked as a fishing guide during the summer months. She was skeptical, but curious. On New Year's Eve, 1984, she positioned herself approximately 30 yards ahead of where previous witnesses had reported the lights emerging. When the procession began, she used a hand auger to drill a 6-inch hole directly in its path. The ice was normal thickness about 14 inches, she said in a 1993 interview with a researcher from Montana State University. But when I pulled the auger out, steam came up. Not a lot, just a wisp. I put my hand over the hole and the water was warm, not hot, but warm, like bath water. She measured the temperature with a pocket thermometer, 51 degrees Fahrenheit. The ambient air temperature that night was -8. By 1986, the New Year's Eve lights had become an open secret among the ice fishing community. No one spoke about them publicly. There was an unspoken agreement that doing so would invite ridicule or, worse, crowds. But those who knew, knew. Walter Erickson, a retired biology teacher from Billings, began documenting the phenomenon in 1985. Over 6 consecutive years, he recorded the time of first appearance, the number of lights observed, the duration of the procession, and the precise coordinates of the path, using triangulation from fixed points on shore. His findings were remarkably consistent. The lights always appeared between 11:38 and 11:47 p.m. The procession always lasted between 9 and 14 minutes. The path never deviated by more than 15 feet from year to year. And the lights always vanished at the same location, a point approximately 200 yards from the lake's outlet, where the bottom drops sharply from 40 feet to over 90. Erickson submitted his data to the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks in 1989, requesting an official investigation. The department responded with a form letter thanking him for his interest and suggesting that the lights were likely caused by bioluminescent organisms or reflected starlight. bioluminescent organisms. Erickson later wrote in his personal journal, "Do not maintain formation. They do not follow the same path for 7 consecutive years, and they do not generate heat." The Forest Service was similarly dismissive. A ranger named Donald Pruitt, stationed at the East Rosebud Trailhead from 1984 to 1990, acknowledged receiving informal reports of unusual lights on the lake, but said he never observed them personally. "People see things on the ice," Pruitt said in a 2008 interview, "especially at night, especially after a few beers. I'm not saying they were lying. I'm just saying I never saw anything that couldn't be explained." When pressed about the warm water reported by multiple witnesses, Pruitt offered no explanation. The United States Geological Survey conducted a routine hydrological assessment of East Rosebud Lake in 1987 as part of a broader study of glacial lakes in the region. The report noted minor thermal anomalies near the outlet, but attributed them to subsurface springs, which are common in the area. No further investigation was recommended. Curiously, the original field notes from the assessment obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2014 include a handwritten annotation that does not appear in the published report. The note initialed J.M. reads, "Thermal readings inconsistent with spring hypothesis. Suggest follow-up survey. Dec January. No follow-up survey was ever conducted." In 1990, Walter Erickson made his final observation of the lights. He noted that the procession seemed shorter than in previous years, only 11 lights, compared to the usual 17 to 22, and that they moved more slowly, taking nearly 18 minutes to complete their journey. On New Year's Eve, 1991, Erickson returned to his usual observation point with 2 colleagues from the Montana Natural History Society. They waited until 1:30 a.m. The lights did not appear. They returned the following year, and the year after that. The lights never came back. Erickson died in 2002 without ever publishing his research. His notes and photographs were donated to the Montana Historical Society, where they remain in an uncatalogued collection. A graduate student who reviewed the materials in 2016 described them as meticulous but inconclusive. Margaret Yellowtail continued to fish East Rosebud Lake until her death in 2011. In her final interview on the subject, conducted in 2009, she offered no theory about what the lights were, or why they stopped. "I don't need to explain everything," she said. "Some things just are. The lake had something to show us, and then it didn't. Maybe we weren't supposed to see it in the first place." Raymond Halverson, the first witness, visited the lake one last time in January 2004, nearly 22 years after his original sighting. He was 81 years old and in declining health. His grandson drove him to the northern shore, helped him onto the ice, and waited in the truck while he sat alone for 2 hours. When he returned, his grandson asked if he had seen anything. "No," Halverson said, "but the water's still warm. I checked." He did not elaborate. He died 7 months later. The outlet where the lights disappeared has never been surveyed below 40 feet. Dive teams have cited poor visibility, unpredictable currents, and the logistical difficulty of cold water operations at altitude. The official depth at that location is listed as unknown. Ice fishermen still visit East Rosebud Lake every winter. A few of the older ones remember the lights. They don't talk about them often, and they don't expect to see them again. But every New Year's Eve, someone drills a hole near the outlet, and every year, the water is just a little warmer than it should be. Someone has been keeping count. Line Creek Plateau sits at approximately 9,000 feet along the Montana-Wyoming border, a windswept expanse of alpine tundra straddling the crest of the Beartooth Range. The plateau stretches nearly 4 miles from east to west, bounded by steep talus slopes and seasonal snowfields that can persist into August. The Beartooth Highway, one of the highest paved roads in the United States, passes within 3 miles of the plateau's eastern edge, but no maintained trail leads to its interior. Most visitors never see it at all. The plateau takes its name from Line Creek, a small tributary that originates in the snowfields above and eventually joins the Clark's Fork of the Yellowstone River. The creek has been mapped since the 1880s, but the plateau itself received little attention until the Custer National Forest began conducting wilderness inventories in the 1960s. Even then, it was considered unremarkable, a high, flat expanse of crumholz and lichen-covered rock, too exposed for camping, too barren for grazing, too distant for casual hiking. The Crow Nation, whose traditional territory encompasses the Beartooth Range, has no recorded name for the plateau. When asked about the area in a 1992 oral history project, Elder Agnes Takes Enemy described it simply as empty land. She did not elaborate, and the interviewer did not press. For most of its recorded history, Line Creek Plateau has been exactly what it appears, a place where nothing happens. That changed on July 14, 2003. Curtis Abernethy had worked as a backcountry ranger for the Custer National Forest for 11 years. His patrol routes covered some of the most remote terrain in the Beartooth Wilderness, including sections that saw fewer than a dozen visitors per year. He was experienced, methodical, and not prone to exaggeration. On the morning of July 14th, Abernethy deviated from his standard route to investigate reports of illegal campfires near the Wyoming border. The reports proved unfounded. He found no evidence of recent human activity, but his detour took him across the western edge of Line Creek Plateau, an area he had not visited in over 3 years. At approximately 10:30 a.m., he encountered the cairns. They were arranged in a circle roughly 20 feet in diameter, each cairn standing between 2 and 3 feet tall. The stones were local granite, weathered and lichen-covered, indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain. At first glance, they appeared to be natural formations, or perhaps old survey markers. But when Abernethy approached the nearest cairn, he noticed a glint of glass near its base. He removed several stones and found a champagne bottle, sealed with its original cork and foil, lying horizontally in a shallow cavity. The label was faded but legible: Moet and Chandon, Brut Imperial. A small tag attached to the neck read in careful handwriting, December 31st, 1978. He checked the other 6 cairns. Each contained a single champagne bottle, identical in brand and presentation, with tags dated December 31st of consecutive years: 1979, 1980, 1981, 1982, 1983, and 1984. The labels were removed from every bottle. The corks were intact. The glass showed no cracks or weathering. Abernethy documented the site with photographs and GPS coordinates, then radioed the Beartooth Ranger District headquarters in Red Lodge. His transmission was logged at 11:17 a.m. "I've got something unusual up here," he said. "Going to need a team." Janet Kowalczyk was the district archaeologist assigned to assess the site. She arrived at Line Creek Plateau on July 16th, accompanied by 2 field technicians and a pack mule carrying excavation equipment. The weather was clear, the visibility unlimited. The cairns were gone. Not collapsed, Kowalczyk said in her official report. Disassembled. The stones were scattered in a pattern consistent with deliberate deconstruction. No bottles, no tags, no evidence of the contents Curtis described. When interviewed for a 2009 article in Montana Quarterly, Kowalczyk was more candid. "I've worked sites that were disturbed by animals, by weather, by vandals," she said. "This wasn't any of those. Someone took those cairns apart stone by stone and removed everything of interest in less than 48 hours. On a plateau with no trail access, no water, and no reason for anyone to be there." She paused. "And they did it without leaving a single footprint." Curtis Abernethy returned to the site with Kowalczyk's team. He confirmed the location was correct. His GPS coordinates matched exactly, but he could offer no explanation for what had happened. "I keep thinking about the dates," he said. 7 bottles, 7 years. But they stopped in 84. That's 19 years before I found them. Someone built those cairns, filled them with champagne, and then just stopped. And then, right after I reported them, someone else came along and erased the whole thing. He was reassigned to a different patrol district the following month. The reason given was Operational efficiency. The Forest Service conducted a formal investigation into the Line Creek Plateau incident, designating it case number FSMT-03729. The investigation lasted 4 months and produced a 43-page report that was never released to the public. A Freedom of Information Act request filed in 2011 yielded a heavily redacted version of the report. Key sections, including the forensic analysis of Abernethy's photographs and interviews with 3 unnamed individuals, were withheld under exemptions related to law enforcement proceedings and personal privacy. What remained was largely procedural: chain of custody documentation, weather records, and a geological survey confirming that the cairn site showed no evidence of recent disturbance. The conclusion, stated in a single paragraph, read, "The reported anomaly could not be independently verified. No further action is recommended." Dr. Howard Ostrander, a professor of anthropology at the University of Montana, reviewed the unredacted portions of the report in 2014 as part of a research project on unexplained wilderness phenomena. He found several inconsistencies. The geological survey was conducted on July 18th, 2 days after Kowalczyk's team arrived, he said. But the report claims the site showed no evidence of recent disturbance. That's technically true if you ignore the fact that a 4-person team with a pack animal had just spent 6 hours there. Either the survey was conducted before the team arrived, which contradicts the timeline, or someone cleaned up after them. Ostrander also noted that the 3 redacted interviews were conducted in August 2003, more than a month after the initial discovery. The interviewees were identified only by initials: R, S, M, T, and J, K. J.K. is almost certainly Janet Kowalczyk, he said, but I have no idea who the other 2 are. They're not mentioned anywhere else in the file. When Ostrander contacted the Forest Service to request clarification, he was told that the case file had been archived and was no longer available for review. The Moet and Chandon Brut Imperial Champagne found in the cairns was produced continuously from 1969 to the present day. The specific label design photographed by Abernethy was used from 1974 to 1986. This is consistent with the dates on the tags. No retailer in Montana, Wyoming, or the surrounding states has any record of selling 7 bottles of Moet and Chandon to a single customer during the period in question. This proves nothing cash transactions leave no trace, but it suggests a level of planning that is difficult to reconcile with the site's remoteness. The question remains: who carried 7 bottles of champagne to a plateau with no trail access, built 7 cairns from local stone, and then stopped? And who returned 19 years later to erase the evidence? Curtis Abernethy retired from the Forest Service in 2012. He now lives in Bozeman and rarely speaks about the incident. In a 2018 email exchange with a journalist researching the story, he offered only one observation: "I've thought about it every New Year's Eve since." He wrote, 7 bottles, 7 years. But there were only 7 cairns. What if there were supposed to be more? What if someone was interrupted? He did not respond to follow-up questions. Line Creek Plateau remains open to the public, though it sees fewer than 50 visitors per year. The site where Abernethy found the cairns is unmarked and unremarkable, just another patch of tundra on a windswept expanse of rock. But every few years, a hiker or ranger reports finding a single stone stacked on another in that approximate location. Never a cairn, never a bottle, just 2 stones, balanced with unusual precision, as if someone is still keeping count. The dead still receive mail in Cook City. Cook City sits at the northeast entrance to Yellowstone National Park, a former mining town of fewer than 100 year-round residents clinging to the edge of the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. The town exists in a state of permanent isolation during winter. The only road in or out is the Beartooth Highway, which closes from mid-October to late May, leaving Cook City accessible only through Yellowstone's northern route via Mammoth Hot Springs. For 5 months of the year, the town is effectively an island. The settlement was established in 1882, when prospectors discovered gold in the surrounding mountains. The boom was brief. By 1900, most of the miners had moved on, leaving behind a scattering of cabins, a general store, and a cemetery on the hill above town, where 37 graves mark the remains of those who never left. The cemetery has not accepted new burials since 1963, when the last plot was filled by a trapper named Einar Lindquist, who froze to death in his cabin during a February blizzard. The Cook City Post Office occupies a small building on Main Street, sandwiched between a snowmobile rental shop and a bar called the Miners' Saloon. It serves a population that swells to nearly 500 during summer and shrinks to double digits when the snow arrives. The postmaster, by tradition, is always a local someone who knows every resident by name and can navigate the peculiarities of delivering mail to a town that sometimes disappears from the map entirely. In 1995, that postmaster was Dolores Swanberg, a third-generation Cook City native who had held the position since 1982. On January 2, 1995, Swanberg arrived at the post office to find 3 letters that had not been there the previous evening. They were addressed in identical handwriting, neat, slightly slanted cursive to 3 individuals: Harold Vickers, Anna Korhonen, and Samuel Redhawk. All 3 had been dead for at least 30 years. Harold Vickers was a mining engineer who died in a tunnel collapse in 1947. Anna Korhonen was a Finnish immigrant who succumbed to tuberculosis in 1951. Samuel Redhawk, a member of the Crow Nation who worked as a hunting guide, drowned in Soda Butte Creek in 1938. The letters bore no return address. The postmarks, stamped in faded black ink, showed a date of January 1st, but the year was illegible, smudged as though the stamp had been applied to wet paper. Swanberg opened the letters, as postal regulations permitted for undeliverable mail. Each contained a single handwritten page dated January 1st, 1995, and written in the first person. Harold Vickers's letter began, "This year, I resolved to spend more time with my granddaughter in Billings. She turned 12 in September, and I missed her birthday again." Harold Vickers had no children. He died at 29, unmarried. Dolores Swanberg kept the letters in a drawer for 6 months before showing them to anyone. When she finally shared them with her cousin, a retired sheriff's deputy named Gerald Torkelson, he dismissed them as a prank, some bored teenager with access to old census records and a talent for forgery. "I told her to throw them away," Torkelson said in a 2008 interview. "Forget the whole thing." But Dolores was spooked. She said the handwriting looked too natural, too confident, like whoever wrote them wasn't trying to fool anyone. They just expected the letters to be delivered. The following January, 4 more letters arrived. The recipients were different. Margaret Swenson, who died in childbirth in 1929. Thomas Brightwater, killed in a logging accident in 1955. And 2 others, whose names Swanberg never disclosed. But the format was identical. New Year's resolutions, written in first person, dated January 1st of the current year, referencing events and people that the deceased could not possibly have known. Margaret Swenson's letter mentioned her intention to finally visit the new hospital in Bozeman. Bozeman Deaconess Hospital was built in 1941, 12 years after her death. Thomas Brightwater's letter expressed hope that his nephew would do well in his studies at Montana State. His nephew, Franklin Brightwater, enrolled at Montana State University in 1987, 32 years after Thomas died. The letters were not predictions. They were statements of intent, written as though the authors were alive, aware, and making plans. Ruth Halvorsen succeeded Dolores Swanberg as postmaster in 2004. By then, the resolution letters, as locals had come to call them, had become an accepted, if unspoken, fact of life in Cook City. They arrived every January 1st, sometimes 3, sometimes 7, never more than 9. The recipients were always deceased. The resolutions always referenced the future. "Dolores warned me before she retired," Halvorsen said, in a 2016 interview with a documentary filmmaker who never released the footage. She said, "They'll come. Don't try to understand them. Just put them in the drawer with the others." I thought she was losing her mind. Then January came. Halvorsen received 5 letters her first year. One was addressed to Einar Lindquist, the trapper who died in 1963. His resolution was to take better care of the dogs this winter. Lindquist had no dogs. He was found alone in his cabin, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles and a week's worth of unsplit firewood. But when Halvorsen mentioned this to a longtime resident named Patricia Wolf, Wolf went pale. Einar had dogs, she said. 2 of them. But they ran off during the blizzard before he died. Nobody ever found them. The United States Postal Inspection Service was contacted in 2007 after a seasonal resident, alarmed by the letters, filed a formal complaint alleging mail fraud. An inspector named David Okonkwo was assigned to the case. Okonkwo spent 3 days in Cook City, interviewing residents, examining the letters, and reviewing postal records. His report, filed in March 2007, concluded that no federal crime had been committed. The letters contained no threats, no requests for money, and no fraudulent claims. They were simply correspondence addressed to individuals who could not receive them. However, Okonkwo's personal notes, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2019, reveal a more complicated assessment. Handwriting analysis inconclusive, he wrote. Samples compared against 11 known deceased residents. No matches. Paper stock consistent with 1980s manufacturing, but available commercially until at least 2002. Ink composition unremarkable. Postmarks remain unexplained. Date stamps do not correspond to any USPS facility in Montana or Wyoming. A separate notation, dated March 15, 2007, reads, "Interviewed former Postmaster D. Swanberg at her home in Gardiner. She showed me a letter received in 1998, addressed to her late father, who died in 1974. Resolution: spend more time with Dolores before she moves away." Swanberg moved to Gardiner in 2004. Okonkwo requested permission to escalate the investigation. His request was denied. The case was closed, with no further action. The Montana Historical Society has declined to archive the resolution letters, citing insufficient provenance documentation. The Park County Historical Society expressed interest in 2012, but withdrew after receiving what its director described as informal pressure from an in-county it Starks unnamed federal agency. Ruth Halvorsen retired in 2020. Before leaving, she counted the letters in her drawer, 63, spanning 25 years of January 1sts. "I stopped reading them after the first few years," she said. "It felt like eavesdropping. These aren't meant for me. They're not meant for anyone who's still here." When asked who she believed was writing them, she shook her head. "I don't think anyone's writing them," she said. "I think they've always existed. We just started noticing." The current postmaster, a woman in her 40s who requested anonymity, confirmed that the letters continue to arrive. She would not say how many she has received or to whom they were addressed. But she did share one detail. "Last year, I got one with a postmark I could actually read," she said. "January 1st, 2031, 6 years from now. The resolution was about learning to forgive someone. I didn't recognize the name, but I looked it up in the cemetery records." She paused. "He's been dead since 1912. The cemetery on the hill above Cook City is open to visitors year-round, though few make the climb in winter. The 37 graves are marked with simple wooden crosses and weathered headstones, some so eroded that the names are no longer legible. No one has reported seeing footprints in the snow leading to or from the graves on January 1st. But every year, without fail, the letters arrive. And every year, the dead make plans for the future. Time moves differently near the water. Mystic Lake lies at the base of the Beartooth Mountains in Stillwater County, Montana, a glacially carved reservoir that stretches nearly 2 miles through a narrow granite canyon. At an elevation of 7,600 feet, it is the largest natural lake in the Beartooth Range and the site of one of Montana's oldest hydroelectric facilities, constructed between 1923 and 1925. The dam that regulates its outflow stands 84 feet tall and remains operational to this day, though the powerhouse has been automated since 1978 and no longer requires permanent staff. The trail to Mystic Lake begins at the West Rosebud Trailhead, a 3-mile hike through lodgepole pine forest that gains approximately 1,200 feet in elevation. In summer, the trail sees steady traffic families, fishermen, photographers, drawn by the lake's mirror-still surface and the jagged peaks that frame its western shore. In winter, the trail is impassable to all but the most experienced backcountry travelers. Snow accumulates to depths of 15 feet or more, and the lake itself freezes solid by mid-December, its surface swept by winds that can drop temperatures to negative 40 degrees. It was in these conditions, on December 31, 2009, that Marcus Lindholm set out alone from the West Rosebud Trailhead. Lindholm was 34 years old, a mechanical engineer from Minneapolis who had moved to Billings 2 years earlier to work for a firm specializing in dam safety assessments. He was an experienced winter hiker, a former member of the Minnesota Search and Rescue Volunteer Corps, and by all accounts, a cautious, methodical man who understood the risks of backcountry travel. His permit application, filed with the Custer-Gallatin National Forest on December 28, stated his intention to reach Mystic Lake, spend one night at the abandoned caretaker's cabin near the dam, and return the following morning. He never came back. The search began on January 2, 2010, after Lindholm failed to check in with his emergency contact, a colleague named Barbara Stensrud. A team of 7 searchers, including 2 wilderness rangers and a tracking dog, reached the lake by helicopter on January 3rd. They found Lindholm's tent pitched approximately 400 yards from the caretaker's cabin, his sleeping bag unrolled but empty, and his backpack containing food, water, and a full set of dry clothes. His snowshoes were leaning against a nearby tree. His boots were inside the tent. The only items missing were his jacket, his headlamp, and a pocket watch that Stensrud later confirmed he always carried a 1927 Hamilton Railroad chronometer that had belonged to his grandfather. The search continued for 11 days. No body was recovered. No tracks led away from the campsite. The official report, filed by the Stillwater County Sheriff's Office on January 19, 2010, listed Lindholm's status as missing, presumed deceased, and attributed his disappearance to environmental exposure and possible disorientation. The case was closed on February 15, 2010. It reopened 3 months later. On May 7, 2010, a seasonal trail maintenance worker named Corinne Oduya discovered a leather-bound journal wedged between 2 rocks approximately 1 mile south of Mystic Lake in an area that had been buried under snow during the initial search. The journal was water-damaged but legible, and the name inscribed on the inside cover was Marcus Lindholm. The final entry was dated January 1, 2010. "Watched the fireworks over the lake at midnight," Lindholm wrote. "Beautiful but strange. The colors seemed wrong, green where they should have been red. Counted down with the others. 11 of us now. Heading back to the cabin to warm up. Resolve this year, call Dad more often." There were no fireworks at Mystic Lake on New Year's Eve 2009. The nearest fireworks display was in Red Lodge, more than 25 miles away, and would not have been visible from the lake due to intervening terrain. And Marcus Lindholm had traveled alone. The journal was turned over to the Stillwater County Sheriff's Office, where it was examined by Detective Anita Frazier, who had led the original investigation. She noted that the entry's handwriting was consistent with samples provided by Lindholm's family, and that the ink appeared fresh relative to earlier entries. "The strange part wasn't what he wrote," Frazier said in a 2014 interview. It was the date. His last confirmed contact was December 30th. His tent was found on January 3rd, undisturbed, with no indication he'd left. But this entry describes January 1st as though he lived through it, as though he was there with other people. She paused. 11 of them. The pocket watch was recovered on August 12, 2010, by a fisherman named Dale Kruger, who found it partially submerged in the shallows near the lake's outlet, approximately 200 yards from where the journal had been discovered. The watch was still running. It was running backward. Kruger, a retired machinist with 40 years of experience in precision tooling, noticed the anomaly immediately. The second hand moved counterclockwise, completing a full rotation every 60 seconds, while the minute and hour hands retreated at proportional rates. The watch lost exactly 1 minute per hour, or, from its own perspective, gained 1 minute per hour in reverse. Kruger brought the watch to a horologist in Billings named Edmund Jarrett, who had serviced Hamilton Railroad chronometers for 3 decades. Jarrett disassembled the movement and examined every component. "There was nothing wrong with it," Jarrett said in a 2012 interview. "No damage, no modification, no foreign material. The mainspring was wound correctly. The escapement was functioning normally. It was simply running in the opposite direction. I've never seen anything like it. I couldn't explain it then, and I can't explain it now." Jarrett attempted to correct the movement by manually repositioning the balance wheel. The watch stopped for approximately 40 seconds, then resumed running backward. He tried 3 more times with identical results. The watch was eventually returned to Lindholm's family, who declined to comment publicly. According to a source close to the family, they attempted to have the watch repaired by 2 additional horologists, both of whom reported the same findings. The mechanism was undamaged and could not be made to run forward. The Stillwater County Sheriff's Office requested assistance from the Montana State Crime Lab in 2011, asking for forensic analysis of both the journal and the pocket watch. The crime lab declined, stating that the items were not evidence of a crime and fell outside their jurisdiction. A formal request to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, filed in 2012 under provisions related to unexplained deaths on federal land, was acknowledged but never acted upon. The file remains listed as pending review. Dr. Helen Vasquez, a physicist at Montana State University who specializes in theoretical mechanics, reviewed the case materials in 2016 at the request of a journalist researching the story. She offered no definitive explanation, but noted several points of interest. "Mechanical systems do not spontaneously reverse," she said. "The laws of thermodynamics are directional. For a watch to run backward, something would have to invert the relationship between cause and effect at the molecular level. That's not impossible. In theory, certain quantum phenomena exhibit time reversal symmetry, but it shouldn't happen to a pocket watch." She hesitated before continuing. "The journal is more troubling. If Lindholm wrote that entry on January 1st, he was describing events that hadn't happened yet, or events that happened in a different sequence than witnesses observed. Either he experienced time differently than we do, or something else wrote that entry in his handwriting." She declined to speculate further. Marcus Lindholm's body has never been found. The official missing persons case remains open, though no active investigation is underway. The caretaker's cabin near Mystic Lake was demolished in 2018 due to structural deterioration, and the trail maintenance program has since rerouted seasonal workers away from the area where the journal was discovered. The pocket watch, according to family sources, stopped running entirely in 2021, 11 years after it was recovered, and 11 years after Lindholm vanished. It stopped at midnight. The hands, frozen in position, point to 12 and 12, the same configuration they would show at the stroke of a new year, whether counting forward or counting back. No one has attempted to wind it since. And somewhere near Mystic Lake, if the journal is to be believed, 11 people counted down together on a night that may not have happened or may still be happening somewhere just out of reach, where time runs in the other direction and the new year never quite arrives. Some frequencies were never meant to be heard. Beartooth Pass crosses the Absaroka-Beartooth Wilderness at an elevation of 10,947 feet, making it the highest point on any paved road in Montana and one of the highest in the contiguous United States. The highway designated U.S. Route 212 climbs from Red Lodge through a series of switchbacks that ascend nearly 5,000 feet in fewer than 30 miles, passing alpine lakes, glacial cirques, and snowfields that persist well into July. In winter, the road closes entirely, buried under drifts that can exceed 40 feet near the summit. The pass was completed in 1936 as part of a federal works project during the Great Depression. Construction required 3 years, the labor of more than 2,000 workers, and the lives of at least 4 men who died in blasting accidents during the final phase of excavation. Their names are not commemorated on any official marker. The road was built over their graves, in a manner of speaking, and the mountain absorbed what remained. Radio communication in the Beartooth Range has always been unreliable. The terrain creates natural barriers to signal propagation, and the high iron content of the surrounding rock produces interference patterns that can disrupt even military-grade equipment. During the construction of the highway, work crews relied on visual signals, flags, and mirrors rather than radio, having learned early that their transmissions would not carry. Modern ham radio operators who frequent the area have adapted to these challenges. Most use frequencies in the 2-meter band, which can sometimes bounce off the ionosphere and reach distant receivers. A smaller community prefers the 70-centimeter band, which offers cleaner local reception but shorter range. Both groups have documented the peculiar acoustic properties of the pass, including dead zones where no signal can penetrate and hot spots where transmissions seem to amplify without explanation. But neither phenomenon prepared them for what began appearing on New Year's Eve, 2001. Gerald Svensson was a retired telecommunications engineer from Laurel, Montana, who had operated amateur radio equipment for over 40 years. On the night of December 31, 2001, he was monitoring the 2-meter repeater frequency from his home station, approximately 60 miles northeast of Beartooth Pass. The repeater, located on a ridge above Red Lodge, was one of several that provided coverage to the surrounding wilderness. At 11:47 p.m., Svensson picked up a signal that did not match any registered operator. "It was a voice," he wrote in his station log. "Male, middle-aged, whispering. I could only catch fragments. Something about a lie he told in 1983. A name Patricia, I think." Then it cut out. Svensson attempted to respond, following standard protocol for unidentified transmissions. He received no reply. The signal did not reappear. He dismissed it as atmospheric skip, a common phenomenon in which signals bounce off the ionosphere and travel hundreds of miles from their point of origin. The voice, he assumed, belonged to an operator in another state, perhaps someone testing equipment or speaking to a companion without realizing their microphone was active. But the following year, on New Year's Eve, 2002, Svensson heard it again. This time, the voice was female. The words were clearer. "I never told him about the money." 1976. "I should have told him about the money." The transmission lasted 11 seconds before fading into static. Lorraine Begay was a radio operator from Crow Agency who monitored the same frequencies as Svensson, though the two had never met in person. On New Year's Eve, 2003, she was parked at a scenic overlook on the Beartooth Highway, using a portable rig to make holiday contacts with other operators across the region. At 11:52 p.m., her receiver picked up a whispered male voice speaking in what she later described as a confessional tone. "I heard him say a name Joseph, and then something about a letter he never mailed," she said in a 2009 interview. "He was apologizing, not to me, not to anyone on the frequency, just apologizing into the air. And then he said a date, February 19th, 1961. And then, nothing." Begay noted the incident in her logbook and mentioned it to Svensson during a radio net the following week. When Svensson shared his own experiences, they realized the pattern. Whispered confessions, always on New Year's Eve, always between 11:45 p.m. and 12:15 a.m. By 2005, at least 9 operators had reported similar incidents. The Ham Radio Emergency Communication Group, a volunteer organization based in Billings, compiled the reports into an informal database. The confessions varied in content, but shared common characteristics. All were spoken in whispers, all referenced specific dates and names, all described minor transgressions rather than serious crimes, and all faded before the speaker finished their statement. The transgressions were remarkably mundane. A borrowed book never returned, a promise broken to a dying relative. A small theft from an employer in 1954. A lie told to avoid attending a funeral. None of the confessions described violence. None described anything illegal beyond petty theft. They were the kinds of regrets that accumulate over a lifetime's small failures of character that most people carry silently to their graves. The Montana section of the American Radio Relay League conducted an informal investigation in 2007, deploying direction-finding equipment along the Beartooth Highway on New Year's Eve. The team, led by a technician named Ross Dahlberg, positioned receivers at 3-mile intervals from Red Lodge to the Wyoming border. "We picked up 4 distinct transmissions over the course of 30 minutes," Dahlberg wrote in his report. All match the profile described by previous witnesses: whispered voices, confessional content, incomplete sentences. We attempted to triangulate the signals using standard direction-finding protocols. The results were inconclusive and disturbing. All 4 signals appeared to originate from the same location, Dahlberg continued, a point approximately 200 feet below the road surface, near mile marker 43. That's solid granite. There's nothing there. The Federal Communications Commission was contacted in 2008 by an operator who believed the transmissions might constitute unlicensed broadcasting, a violation of federal law. An FCC field agent reviewed the documentation and declined to investigate, citing insufficient evidence of intentional interference. A handwritten note appended to the agent's report, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2015, reads, "Signal characteristics inconsistent with known transmission methods. Recommend no further action. Do not recontact witnesses." Dr. Miriam Okafor, a professor of electrical engineering at Montana Tech, analyzed recordings of the confessions provided by amateur operators in 2012. She found several anomalies that she could not explain. "The audio spectrum is wrong," she said. "Human speech typically falls within a predictable frequency range, with harmonics that correspond to the physical structure of the vocal tract. These recordings have the harmonics, but they're inverted, as though the sound is being produced by a process that mimics speech without actually involving human anatomy." When asked what process might produce such a result, Okafor declined to speculate. "I'm an engineer," she said. "I can tell you what the data shows. I can't tell you what it means." The confessions continue to appear. Operators who monitor the Beartooth Pass frequencies on New Year's Eve now do so with a mixture of curiosity and unease, knowing what they might hear. Some keep recordings. Others turn off their equipment before midnight. A database maintained by the Ham Radio Emergency Communication Group contains transcripts of over 70 individual confessions spanning 2 decades. The names mentioned: Patricia, Joseph, Eleanor, Robert, dozens of others, have never been matched to any known missing persons, accident victims, or deceased individuals in the region. The dates referenced range from 1929 to 1997. None are more recent. Whatever the voices are confessing, they stopped accumulating new regrets at the turn of the century. Gerald Svensson died in 2019 at the age of 84. In his final years, he recorded every New Year's Eve transmission from his home station, accumulating over 200 hours of audio. His family donated the recordings to the Montana Historical Society, which has not yet cataloged them. Before his death, Svensson shared one observation with his daughter that he had never included in any official report. "The voices sound relieved," he said, "like they've been waiting a long time to say these things, like they finally found someone who would listen." Mile marker 43 on the Beartooth Highway marks a curve overlooking a steep drainage that feeds into Rock Creek. There is no pullout, no scenic viewpoint, no reason to stop. The road passes over solid granite, blasted and graded during the original construction in the 1930s. 4 men died building this section. Their names were never recorded. But every year, at the stroke of midnight, someone beneath the stone finds a frequency, and someone, somewhere, is still confessing. The camera saw something that wasn't there. Clark's Fork Canyon cuts through the northeast corner of the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness, a 12-mile gash in the earth carved by the Clark's Fork of the Yellowstone River over millions of years. At its deepest point, the canyon plunges nearly 1,200 feet below the surrounding plateau, its walls layered with Precambrian granite and metamorphic rock that predates complex life on Earth. The river at the bottom runs cold and fast, fed by snowmelt from the peaks above, and the sound of its passage echoes off the stone in ways that make distance difficult to judge. The canyon lies approximately 15 miles northeast of Cook City and roughly 20 miles from Red Lodge as the crow flies. In summer, it attracts a small but steady stream of visitors, fishermen seeking the native cutthroat trout that still survive in its upper reaches, photographers drawn by the dramatic geology, and the occasional climber testing skills against the canyon's vertical faces. In winter, access becomes difficult. The roads close, the trails vanish under snow, and the canyon returns to a state of isolation that has defined it for most of human history. The Crow Nation, whose traditional territory encompasses the region, called the river Ichi-Kashbapua, meaning lodge where we cry. The name refers to a mourning ceremony conducted at a site near the canyon's rim, where families once gathered to honor the dead. Elders have described the canyon as a place of passage, not dangerous exactly, but liminal, a threshold between what is and what was. It was on the rim of this canyon, on New Year's Eve, 1988, that a photographer named Victor Anderson placed his camera. Anderson was 41 years old, a freelance wildlife photographer based in Bozeman who had spent the previous decade documenting the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. His work had appeared in National Geographic, Audubon, and several regional publications. He was known for his patience, his technical precision, and his willingness to endure conditions that would discourage less dedicated practitioners. In late December 1988, Anderson conceived of a project he called Midnight in the Mountains, a series of long-exposure photographs capturing New Year's Eve celebrations from remote wilderness locations. The concept was simple. Set up motion-triggered cameras in areas with clear sightlines to distant towns, then retrieve the equipment the following day and see what the cameras had recorded. He selected 4 locations, including a meadow on the northern rim of Clark's Fork Canyon, which offered an unobstructed view toward Red Lodge, where the town's annual fireworks display would be visible as a distant glow on the horizon. On December 30th, Anderson hiked to the site and installed a Nikon F3 with a motor drive mounted on a tripod and connected to an infrared motion sensor. The camera was loaded with 36 exposure, Kodachrome 64 slide film, his preferred stock for low-light work. He set the aperture to 4, the shutter speed to 1/30th of a second, and the focus to infinity. The motion sensor was calibrated to trigger the camera whenever it detected heat signatures consistent with large mammals, a precaution intended to capture any wildlife that might pass through the frame. He returned to Bozeman that evening, planning to retrieve the equipment on January 2nd. When he developed the film, he found 47 exposures. All 47 showed the same image. The image depicted the meadow from the exact angle where Anderson had positioned his camera. The composition was identical in every frame, the same foreground of dry grass, the same line of subalpine fir along the southern edge, the same distant ridgeline. But the lighting was wrong. Every photograph showed the scene in full daylight. Not the flat light of an overcast winter morning, but the warm, directional sunlight of a summer afternoon. The shadows were long, stretching toward the east, consistent with a sun position around 4 or 5 p.m. The grass, which Anderson knew had been buried under 18 inches of snow, appeared dry and golden, as though it had not seen moisture in weeks. The sky was cloudless and blue. There were no fireworks, there was no snow, there was no indication that the photographs had been taken in winter at all. Patricia Lundgren was a colleague of Anderson's who worked as a photo editor for Montana Magazine. When Anderson showed her the slides in early January 1989, she assumed they were the result of a technical error, perhaps a double exposure, or film that had been previously used and improperly rewound. "I told him to check his equipment," Lundgren recalled in a 2006 interview. The F3 was a reliable camera, but motor drives could malfunction. "I thought maybe the film had advanced incorrectly, or the shutter had stuck, or something had gone wrong with the sensor." Victor just shook his head. He said the film was fresh from the canister. He'd loaded it himself. Lundgren examined the slides under magnification. She found no evidence of double exposure, no overlapping frames, no ghosting that would indicate mechanical failure. The images were clean, she said. Technically perfect. Whatever the camera saw, it recorded exactly what was in front of it. When asked what she believed the camera had seen, Lundgren paused for a long moment. "I don't know," she said. "I've worked in photography for 30 years. I know what a mistake looks like. This wasn't a mistake." Anderson returned to the Clark's Fork Canyon site in July 1989, accompanied by a surveyor named Dennis Robitaille, who had agreed to help him document the location. They brought a theodolite to measure sun angles and a series of reference photographs to compare against the original slides. The findings were precise and unsettling. The shadows in the photographs matched the sun position for approximately 4:45 p.m. in late June or early July, Robitaille said in a 2001 interview, not December. The angle was completely wrong for winter. If those photos were taken on New Year's Eve, the sun would have set 5 hours earlier. There shouldn't have been any directional light at all. Robitaille also noted that the vegetation in the photographs appeared consistent with late summer conditions. The grass had gone to seed, the wildflowers were absent, and the fir trees showed the dark green coloration typical of July rather than the frost-damaged brown of December. "It was like the camera took a picture of a different season," he said, "or a different year entirely." Anderson submitted the slides to Eastman Kodak for forensic analysis in February 1989. The company's technical services division examined the film and confirmed that the emulsion was consistent with Kodachrome 64, manufactured in 1988, that the exposures had been made within a single continuous session, and that there was no evidence of tampering or post-processing. A letter accompanying the analysis, signed by a technician named R. Yamamoto, concluded, "The images appear to have been recorded normally. We cannot explain the apparent discrepancy between the reported shooting conditions and the content of the photographs." The letter included a handwritten postscript that was not part of the official report. "Mr. Anderson, have you considered that the camera may have photographed something that wasn't there when you set it up?" Anderson never publicly responded to the suggestion. The Montana Historical Society declined to archive the slides when Anderson offered them in 1993, citing insufficient historical significance. The Yellowstone Association expressed interest but ultimately passed, noting that the images did not depict any identifiable wildlife or landmarks associated with the park. The slides remained in Anderson's personal collection until his death in 2014. His estate donated them to the Carbon County Museum in Red Lodge, where they are stored but not displayed. A request to view them in 2019 was denied due to preservation concerns. Victor Anderson continued his photography career until 2008, when declining health forced him to retire. He never returned to the Clark's Fork Canyon site after the 1989 survey expedition. In a 2011 interview for a local podcast about unexplained phenomena in Montana, he offered his only public statement on the incident. "I've spent my whole life trying to capture what's in front of me," he said. But that night, the camera captured something else. "I don't know if it was the past, or the future, or some other version of that meadow that exists alongside our own. I only know that 47 times between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. something triggered that sensor. And 47 times the camera showed me a summer afternoon that I was never there to see." He paused before adding, "I think about it every New Year's Eve. I wonder if it's still happening, if some camera, somewhere, is still taking pictures of that meadow in July. And I wonder who's standing there, just out of frame, waiting for someone to finally see them." The meadow on the rim of Clark's Fork Canyon remains accessible to hikers during the summer months. The view toward Red Lodge is unchanged. The fireworks still bloom over the town every New Year's Eve, visible as a faint glow on the horizon. No one has reported setting up a motion-triggered camera at the site since 1988. But the infrared spectrum does not care whether anyone is watching. And somewhere, perhaps, The shutter is still firing, capturing a moment that never happened in a season that never ends. The ice wrote their names before they arrived. Grasshopper Glacier lies in the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness at an elevation of approximately 11,000 feet, tucked into a north-facing cirque beneath the shadow of Iceberg Peak. The glacier takes its name from the millions of grasshoppers entombed within its ancient ice insects that flew into snowstorms centuries ago and were preserved in layers that have been accumulating since the last ice age. On warm summer days, melting ice releases their bodies onto the surface, creating dark bands of organic matter that stripe the glacier like pages in a closed book. The glacier has been retreating since the 1920s. Climate records indicate it has lost approximately 40% of its mass in the past century, and current projections suggest it may disappear entirely within the next 50 years. What remains is roughly half a mile long and a quarter-mile wide, a remnant of a frozen river that once stretched for miles across the Beartooth Plateau. Access to Grasshopper Glacier requires a strenuous 12-mile hike from the nearest trailhead, followed by a technical approach across loose talus and seasonal snowfields. The area sees fewer than 300 visitors per year, most of them during a narrow window in July and August, when the route is passable without specialized equipment. In winter, the glacier is effectively unreachable except by helicopter or extended backcountry expedition. The Custer-Gallatin National Forest conducts annual surveys of the glacier to monitor its recession and document any changes to the surrounding ecosystem. These surveys typically occur in late summer, but in January 2015, a special winter assessment was ordered, following reports of unusual acoustic phenomena in the region. Sounds described by a passing pilot as like voices singing beneath the snow. The survey team consisted of 2 glaciologists and 3 wilderness rangers. They reached the glacier on January 2, 2015, after a 2-day approach from the Rosebud Creek trailhead. What they found was recorded in a field report that was never officially published. Dr. Ingrid Solheim was a glaciologist from the University of Montana who had studied Grasshopper Glacier for over a decade. She had visited the site at least 20 times and considered herself intimately familiar with its features, the crevasse patterns, the moraine deposits, the way light filtered through the ice on clear days. On January 2nd, she noticed something she had never seen before. There were letters in the ice, she wrote in her field notes, not carved or scratched. The crystalline structure itself had formed into shapes that resembled writing. I thought it was pareidolia at first, the mind seeing patterns where none exist, but when I got closer, I could read them. They were names. 7 names, arranged in a rough column near the glacier's eastern margin, each approximately 18 inches tall and composed of what Solheim described as negative space within the ice matrix. Areas where the crystal lattice had failed to form properly, leaving voids in the shape of letters. The names were Marcus Johansson, Rebecca Threecrow, David Nakamura, Cynthia Beltran, Theodore Voss, Angela Whitehorse, Samuel Okonkwo. Ranger Patricia Delacroix photographed the names using a high-resolution digital camera. The images showed clear, legible text embedded within the ice at a depth of approximately 4 inches. The letters cast faint shadows in the afternoon light. "I've seen air bubbles in glacier ice," Delacroix said in a 2017 interview. "I've seen sediment layers and volcanic ash bands. I've never seen anything that looked like writing, and I've definitely never seen writing that spelled out actual names." The team attempted to cross-reference the names with the Forest Service permit database. All 7 matched individuals who had filed backcountry permits for the New Year's Eve holiday period, with declared destinations in the Beartooth Wilderness. All 7 had returned safely from their trips. None had reported visiting Grasshopper Glacier. Dr. Solheim contacted each of the 7 hikers by phone over the following week. Their responses were remarkably consistent. Marcus Johansson, a 34-year-old software developer from Seattle, said he had spent New Year's Eve camped near Mystic Lake, approximately 8 miles from the glacier. He had no memory of traveling to Grasshopper Glacier and no reason to do so. Rebecca Three Crow, a 29-year-old wildlife biologist from the Crow Reservation, said she had hiked to Fossil Lake on December 31st and returned via the same route on January 1st. She had never been to Grasshopper Glacier in her life. The other 5 provided similar accounts. All had been in the wilderness on New Year's Eve. All had been within a day's travel of the glacier. None had any memory of visiting it. When Solheim informed them that their names had been found written in the ice, their reactions ranged from skeptical to disturbed. Theodore Voss, a retired geologist from Billings, asked if he could see the photographs. When Solheim sent them to him, he did not respond for 3 days. "I don't know what to tell you," Voss finally wrote in an email. "That's my name. That's my handwriting. But I didn't write it, and I wasn't there." The survey team remained at the glacier for 48 hours, documenting the anomaly and collecting ice cores from the vicinity of the names. By the morning of January 4th, the names had disappeared. "They didn't melt," Solheim wrote in her final field report. "The ice sublimated, transitioned directly from solid to vapor without passing through a liquid phase. The letters simply ceased to exist. Within 2 days, there was no evidence they had ever been there." The ice cores were transported to the University of Montana's Glaciology Laboratory for analysis. The results, completed in March 2015, showed nothing unusual standard isotope ratios, normal air bubble content, no anomalous chemical signatures. A crystallography specialist named Dr. Emil Rasmussen examined thin sections of the ice under polarized light. He found no structural explanation for how letter-shaped voids could form within a glacier. "Ice crystals grow according to predictable thermodynamic principles," Rasmussen said in a 2016 interview. "They don't spontaneously arrange themselves into alphabetic characters. Whatever caused those formations, it wasn't any natural process I'm familiar with." When asked what unnatural process might be responsible, Rasmussen declined to speculate. The Forest Service conducted an internal review of the incident in April 2015. The review concluded that the photographs were authentic, but that no definitive explanation for the observed phenomenon could be established. A recommendation to publish the findings in a peer-reviewed journal was overruled by regional administrators, who cited concerns about public misinterpretation. Dr. Solheim resigned from the survey program in 2016, citing personal reasons. In a 2018 interview with a journalist researching unexplained wilderness phenomena, she offered her only public comment on the incident. "I've spent my career studying ice," she said. "I understand how it forms, how it moves, how it records the history of the atmosphere. But I don't understand how it knew those names. I don't understand how it wrote them before those people arrived in the wilderness. And I don't understand why it erased them before anyone else could see." She paused. "The glacier is dying. It's been dying for 100 years. Maybe it was trying to tell us something before it's gone, or maybe it was trying to remember." The 7 hikers whose names appeared in the ice have been contacted periodically by researchers over the past decade. All report normal lives with no unusual experiences or health issues. Several have returned to the Beartooth Wilderness since 2015. None have visited Grasshopper Glacier. When asked why, Rebecca Three Crow offered the most direct response. "I don't want to see my name there again," she said. "And I don't want to find out what happens if it appears a second time." Grasshopper Glacier continues to retreat. The summer melt season grows longer each year, and the grasshopper layers that gave the glacier its name are increasingly exposed to the air. Ancient insects thawing after centuries of preservation, their bodies finally completing journeys interrupted by long-ago storms. The Forest Service no longer conducts winter surveys of the glacier. The official reason is budgetary constraints. But the January 2015 field report, buried in an archive at the Custer-Gallatin National Forest headquarters, contains a final notation that was not included in the internal review. The notation, handwritten in Dr. Solheim's careful script, reads, "Check permit database for any hikers reported missing in the Beartooth Wilderness on future New Year's Eves. Compare names to glacier observations. No such comparison has ever been conducted. And every winter, the snow falls on Grasshopper Glacier, building new layers atop the old layers that will compact into ice, trapping whatever the cold chooses to preserve. Perhaps it is only air bubbles and volcanic ash. Perhaps it is something else. The ice keeps its own records. No one in Jardine celebrates the new year, but someone always does. Jardine clings to the side of a mountain 6 miles north of Gardiner, Montana, at the end of a narrow gravel road that climbs 2,300 feet through switchbacks and seasonal washouts. The town was founded in 1883 after gold was discovered in the nearby hillsides, and at its peak in the early 1900s, it supported a population of nearly 500 miners, merchants, families who believed the wealth would last forever. It did not. The mines closed and reopened and closed again, following the uncertain rhythms of commodity prices and corporate investment. The last major operation, a cyanide heap leach facility run by a Canadian company, shut down in 1996 after years of environmental controversy. What remains today is a scattering of cabins, a handful of year-round residents who number between 30 and 40 depending on the season, and a silence that settles over the valley like snowfall. The town has no mayor, no formal government, no commercial establishments. The nearest services are in Gardiner, a 15-minute drive down the mountain on a road that becomes impassable several times each winter. Most residents of Jardine are people who sought isolation, deliberately retirees, artists, survivalists, and others who prefer the company of mountains to the company of strangers. They do not throw parties. They do not gather in groups. And according to every resident interviewed over the past 17 years, none of them have ever celebrated New Year's Eve outdoors. Yet every January 1st, since 2007, evidence of a celebration appears in the streets. Maureen Fitzgerald was the first to report hearing the sounds. A wildlife photographer who had moved to Gardiner in 2005. She was driving back from a late dinner in Livingston on New Year's Eve, 2006, the holiday that would turn into 2007. When she passed the turnoff to Jardine at approximately 11:45 p.m. "I heard music," she said in a 2012 interview. "Big band, like something from the 1940s. And voices, people laughing, talking over each other the way they do at a party. I thought maybe someone was hosting an event up there. I almost turned around to investigate. She did not. The road was icy, the hour was late, and she had no connection to anyone in Jardine. But the following morning, her neighbor mentioned that a friend who lived in Jardine had found confetti scattered along the main road through town, metallic silver and gold streamers, the kind used at formal celebrations, lying in drifts against the porches of abandoned buildings. No one in Jardine claimed responsibility. Harlan Deschamps has lived in Jardine since 1989. A former mining engineer who stayed after the cyanide operation closed, he occupies a cabin near the center of town and knows every permanent resident by name. "I heard about the confetti that first year," he said in a 2014 interview. "I walked the whole town the next day, talked to everyone. Nobody threw a party. Nobody had visitors. But somebody left champagne corks on my porch, 3 of them, still damp, smelling like they'd just been popped." Deschamps began keeping records. Over the following years, he documented the evidence that appeared each January 1st. Confetti in varying colors and styles. Champagne corks ranging from inexpensive domestic brands to vintage French labels. Occasional fragments of streamers caught in tree branches. And once, in 2011, a woman's silk glove lying in the snow near the old assay office. The glove was vintage 1920s or 30s, according to a costume historian Deschamps consulted, and showed no signs of weathering or age. It appeared to have been dropped moments before it was found. No one in Jardine reported losing a glove. The sounds have been heard by at least 30 individuals over the past 17 years. Most are residents of Gardiner who happen to be driving past the Jardine turnoff near midnight on New Year's Eve. A smaller number are visitors staying at nearby accommodations or passing through on their way to or from Yellowstone. Their descriptions are remarkably consistent. "Music," said Thomas Birdsong, a retired postal worker from Livingston who heard the sounds in 2013. Old-fashioned music, like a swing orchestra, and voices, dozens of them, maybe more. It sounded like a ballroom. Laughter, said Elaine Nygaard, a seasonal ranger who heard the sounds in 2017. The kind of laughter you hear when people are genuinely happy, not forced, not performative, real joy. Glasses clinking, said Dennis Pham, a truck driver who stopped at the turnoff in 2020 to check his tire chains. Toasts, someone counting down, and then cheering, like the ball had just dropped. But when I looked up the road, there were no lights. Nothing. Those who have investigated in person report finding the town dark and silent, with no evidence of recent activity, no tire tracks in fresh snow, no footprints leading to or from buildings, no glow of electric lights or candles in any window. Yet by morning, the confetti appears. The Park County Sheriff's Office received its first formal complaint about the Jardine Sounds in 2009, filed by a Gardner resident who believed the town was hosting illegal gatherings. A deputy drove to Jardine on January 1st and found no evidence of a party, no noise violations, and no residents willing to discuss the matter. They just looked at me like I was crazy. The deputy, whose name was withheld from the report, wrote in his summary. One guy said he'd lived there for 15 years and never heard anything on New Year's Eve. But he also said he locks his doors and stays inside every December 31st. When I asked why, he wouldn't answer. The complaint was closed as unfounded. A second investigation was conducted in 2014 after a tourist reported seeing figures dancing in the windows of an abandoned building near the old mine entrance. The building, a former boarding house that had been vacant since 1953, was searched by two deputies who found no evidence of occupancy but did find a scatter of fresh confetti on the floor of the main room, along with a champagne bottle standing upright on a windowsill. The bottle was empty. The label had been removed. Fingerprint analysis produced no usable results. Dr. Vivian Ostrowski, a folklorist at Montana State University, has studied the Jardine phenomenon since 2016 as part of a broader research project on unexplained acoustic events in rural communities. She has interviewed 18 witnesses and collected physical evidence from 7 separate January 1sts. What strikes me is the consistency, she said in a 2021 interview. The same music, the same sounds, the same evidence appearing in the same locations. If this were a hoax, you'd expect variation, different styles, different approaches, mistakes that reveal the perpetrators. But there's no variation. It's the same party, every year, like a recording being played back. When asked who might be playing the recording, Ostrowski shook her head. That's not the right question, she said. The right question is, what kind of event leaves physical evidence but no witnesses? What kind of celebration happens only when no one is watching? She paused. Jardine was a mining town. A lot of people lived there, worked there, died there. The mines took lives, cave-ins, accidents, silicosis. The town buried its dead in a cemetery that's mostly overgrown now. But the records show that Jardine used to throw a New Year's Eve party every year, from 1898 until 1942. A big event, with music and dancing, held in the Miners' Hall. The Miners' Hall burned down in 1943. No one was inside at the time, but the building was never rebuilt. The party stopped in 42, Ostrowski said, and it started again in 2007, 64 years later. I don't know why. I don't know what changed. Harlan Deschamps still lives in Jardine, though he no longer keeps detailed records of the January 1st evidence. His health has declined in recent years, and he rarely ventures outside during winter. But every New Year's Eve, he follows the same routine. He locks his doors at sunset. He turns off all his lights. He sits in his darkened living room and listens. I hear it, he said in a 2022 interview. Every year, right around midnight, the music starts, the laughter starts. And I know that if I walked outside and looked down the street, I wouldn't see anyone. But I also know they're there. Whoever they are, whatever they're celebrating. When asked why he never investigates, Deschamps was quiet for a long moment. Because I'm not invited, he finally said. None of us are. The party isn't for the living. It never was. The road to Jardine remains open year-round, though it requires four-wheel drive and careful navigation during winter months. Visitors occasionally make the drive out of curiosity, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever happens on New Year's Eve. None have succeeded. But every January 1st, the confetti falls in streets where no one walks, and the champagne corks lie in snow that shows no footprints. Somewhere in the abandoned buildings of Jardine, the music plays on, and somewhere, someone is still counting down. The mountain answered back. Silver Run Peak rises to an elevation of 12,500 feet in the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness, a pyramidal summit of fractured granite that marks the boundary between Stillwater and Carbon counties in south-central Montana. The peak takes its name from Silver Run Creek, which originates in the snowfields below its eastern face and flows north toward the Stillwater River, carrying sediment that early prospectors mistook for silver ore. The mountain is not technically difficult to climb, but it is remote. The standard approach from the West Rosebud Trailhead requires a 14-mile hike through dense forest, across two alpine basins, and up a steep talus slope that shifts unpredictably underfoot. Most climbers attempt the peak in late July or August when the snow has melted enough to reveal the route. In winter and early spring, the mountain is effectively inaccessible without specialized equipment and extensive backcountry experience. The Beartooth Range has a long history of search and rescue operations. The combination of rugged terrain, unpredictable weather, and remote access has claimed dozens of lives over the past century. Most incidents involve falls, exposure, or avalanches. A smaller number involve disappearances that are never fully explained. Hikers who set out on established trails and simply failed to return, their remains never recovered despite extensive searches. Silver Run Peak has been the site of 3 such disappearances since 1952. On December 28, 1974, a 4th person went missing. Daniel Okonkwo was a 26-year-old graduate student in geology at the University of Montana, conducting fieldwork on glacial moraines in the Beartooth Range. He had departed from the Mystic Lake Trailhead on December 26th with supplies for a 5-day solo expedition, planning to collect rock samples from the cirque below Silver Run Peak. He was experienced, well-equipped, and had filed a detailed itinerary with the Stillwater County Sheriff's Office. When he failed to check in on December 29th, a search operation was initiated. The search team consisted of 12 volunteers from the Stillwater County Search and Rescue Unit, divided into 3 groups of 4. The plan called for a coordinated approach from 3 directions. 1 team ascending from the east via West Rosebud Creek, 1 team approaching from the south via Mystic Lake, and 1 team traversing from the west along the ridgeline connecting Silver Run to neighboring peaks. Radio communication in the area was unreliable due to the terrain. The teams instead relied on signal mirrors heliographs to coordinate their movements across the mountain. The technique was standard practice for wilderness operations in the 1970s, using flashes of reflected sunlight to send coded messages between parties separated by miles of rugged landscape. On the morning of December 30th, the eastern and western teams established visual contact across the summit of Silver Run Peak. The eastern team, led by a veteran rescuer named Lloyd Gustafson, positioned themselves on a ridge approximately 1 mile from the peak. The western team, led by a Forest Service ranger named Camille Redhawk, occupied a similar position on the opposite side. At 9:42 a.m., Gustafson signaled the western team with 3 short flashes, indicating that his group was beginning their ascent. Redhawk responded with 2 long flashes, acknowledging the message. At 10:17 a.m., Redhawk signaled again a prearranged code indicating that the western team had completed their search sector and found no sign of Okonkwo. Gustafson acknowledged. At 10:23 a.m., the western team packed their equipment and began descending toward their base camp, a process that Redhawk later estimated took approximately 4 minutes. By 10:27 a.m., all 4 members of the western team were below the ridgeline, out of sight of the eastern team, and no longer carrying signal mirrors. At 10:28 a.m., Gustafson saw a flash of light from the western slope. Beverly Johansson was the assistant team leader on the eastern approach. She had worked search and rescue operations in the Beartooth Range for 7 years and was familiar with the visual characteristics of heliograph signals. "It was definitely a mirror flash," she said in a 1976 interview. "Not sunlight reflecting off snow or ice. Those have a different quality, more diffuse. This was sharp, directional, intentional. Someone was signaling us." The flashes continued at irregular intervals. Gustafson counted 14 distinct signals over the following 11 minutes, all originating from approximately the same location on the western slope, a rocky outcrop roughly 200 yards below the summit. He attempted to respond, but received no acknowledgement of his signals. At 10:39 a.m., the flashes stopped. Gustafson radioed base camp and requested confirmation of the Western team's position. The response came back within minutes. All 4 members of Red Hawk's team were accounted for, having reached their base camp at the bottom of the western drainage. None of them had signaled after 10:23 a.m. "I asked Lloyd if he was sure about what he'd seen," said Norman Breivik, the search coordinator who received Gustafson's radio transmission. "He said he was certain. He said Beverly had seen it too." And 2 other members of his team, 4 witnesses, all experienced in heliograph communication. They all saw the same thing. Breivik dispatched the southern team to investigate the location from which the signals had originated. They reached the rocky outcrop at approximately 2:15 p.m. The site was empty. There were no footprints in the surrounding snow, no equipment, no evidence that anyone had been there within the past several days. But there was one anomaly. "We found a piece of glass," said Martin Selvig, a member of the southern team, in a 1977 interview. "About 2 inches square, very thin, embedded in a crack between 2 rocks. It looked like it had been there for a while. The edges were weathered, and there was lichen growing on one side. But when I picked it up and held it to the light, it still reflected. It could have been used as a signal mirror." The glass was collected as evidence, but was never formally analyzed. It disappeared from the Stillwater County Sheriff's evidence room sometime between 1978 and 1982. No documentation exists explaining its removal. Daniel Okonkwo's body was recovered on January 4, 1975, in a crevasse approximately 3/4 of a mile east of Silver Run Peak. The coroner determined that he had died from injuries sustained in a fall, likely occurring on December 27th or 28th. His signal mirror, a standard 3 by 5-inch glass heliograph issued by the university's geology department, was found in his pack, undamaged. The official search report, filed on January 15, 1975, made no mention of the anomalous signals observed on December 30th. A handwritten addendum discovered in Lloyd Gustafson's personal papers after his death in 2003 offers the only official acknowledgement of the incident. "Signals received from Western Slope after W team departed," the addendum reads. "Source unknown. Duration approx 11 minutes. No explanation. Recommend no further inquiry." Camille Red Hawk retired from the Forest Service in 1991. She declined to discuss the Silver Run Peak incident for over 2 decades, but in 2009 she agreed to a brief interview with a researcher compiling a history of search and rescue operations in Montana. "I've thought about it a lot over the years," she said. "We were all off that ridge by 10:27. I checked my watch when we started down. There was no one left up there to send signals, but Lloyd saw them, Beverly saw them, and I believe them." When asked what she thought had caused the signals, Red Hawk was silent for a long moment. "Daniel was a geologist," she finally said. "He understood how light moves through rock, how crystals form, how minerals reflect and refract. Maybe he found something up there that could send signals without anyone holding it. Maybe the mountain has its own way of communicating." She paused. "Or maybe someone was trying to tell us where to look. We found him 4 days later, less than a mile from where those signals originated. Maybe that wasn't a coincidence." Lloyd Gustafson never returned to Silver Run Peak after 1974. In a letter to a fellow rescuer, written in 1987, he described the incident as the one I can't explain and can't forget. "I've seen a lot of strange things in the mountains," he wrote. "Lights that shouldn't be there. Sounds that don't match anything natural. But I've always found explanations: weather, animals, echoes, fatigue. This was different. Someone was signaling us, someone who wasn't there." The letter concludes with a single question, underlined twice. If Daniel was already dead, who was trying to guide us to him? Silver Run Peak remains a popular destination for experienced mountaineers during the summer months. The route from West Rosebud is well documented, and the views from the summit are considered among the finest in the Beartooth Range. Climbers occasionally report seeing flashes of light from the western slope, brief, sharp reflections that appear and disappear without obvious source. Most attribute them to sunlight, striking exposed quartz or mica in the granite. But some pause, just for a moment, and watch to see if the flashes form a pattern. The mountain keeps its own time, and sometimes it still answers back. The last train left Red Lodge 46 years before anyone heard it arrive. Red Lodge sits at the base of the Beartooth Mountains in Carbon County, Montana, a former coal mining town of approximately 2,000 residents that has reinvented itself as a gateway to Yellowstone National Park and the scenic Beartooth Highway. The town's main street retains much of its early 20th century architecture: brick storefronts, wooden awnings, and the kind of quiet charm that attracts tourists seeking a glimpse of the Old West. But the railroad that built Red Lodge is gone. The Rocky Fork Railway was established in 1889 to haul coal from the mines above town to the Northern Pacific Main Line in Laurel, 60 miles to the northeast. At its peak, the line moved over 500,000 tons of coal per year, supporting a network of mines that employed thousands of workers and sustained the town's economy for 3 decades. The railway also carried passengers, miners, commuting to the camps above town, families traveling to Billings for supplies, and occasional tourists drawn by the mountain scenery. The decline began in the 1920s. Competition from oil and natural gas reduced demand for coal, and a series of mine disasters, including an explosion in 1943 that killed 74 workers, accelerated the industry's collapse. The last commercial coal shipment left Red Lodge in 1951. Passenger service ended the following year. By February 1953, the Rocky Fork Railway had ceased all operations, and the tracks were pulled up for scrap within 18 months. What remained were the rail bed, now a hiking trail, and a handful of artifacts: a restored caboose in Lyons Park, a few rusted switching mechanisms, and the crossing signals at the intersection of Broadway Avenue and 8th Street, which were disconnected but never removed. For 46 years, those signals stood silent, their lights dark, their mechanical arms frozen in the upright position. Until midnight on December 31st, 1999. The first report came from Margaret Lindquist, a 73-year-old lifelong resident of Red Lodge who lived in a house 3 blocks from the former rail crossing. At 12:02 a.m. on January 1st, 2000, she called the Carbon County Sheriff's Office to report hearing a train. "I told them I wasn't crazy," Lindquist said in a 2004 interview. "I grew up with that railroad. I remember the sound of the wheels, the whistle, the way the whole house would shake when a freight train passed. I hadn't heard those sounds in almost 50 years, but I heard them that night, clear as anything." The dispatcher noted the call but took no action, assuming Lindquist was confused by New Year's Eve celebrations or perhaps suffering from age-related disorientation. Then the second call came, and the third, and the fourth. By 12:30 a.m., the sheriff's office had received 11 separate reports of a train passing through Red Lodge at midnight. The witnesses ranged in age from 19 to 84. They included a bartender closing up the Snow Creek Saloon, a family returning from a New Year's Eve party in Billings, and a night clerk at the Pollard Hotel, who stepped outside for a cigarette and heard what he described as a locomotive whistle, 2 long blasts and 1 short, like they used to do at crossings. The most detailed account came from Wilfred Johansson. Johansson was 81 years old in 1999, a retired railroad engineer who had worked for the Northern Pacific from 1942 until 1978. He had never worked the Rocky Fork line, but he had trained on similar equipment and maintained a lifelong interest in railroad history. On New Year's Eve, 1999, Johansen was sitting on his front porch, watching the modest fireworks display that the town had organized in Lyons Park. At approximately 11:58 p.m., he heard a sound that made him set down his coffee and stand up. "It was a whistle," he said in a 2001 interview. "Not a modern diesel horn. Those are harsh, mechanical. This was a steam whistle. Specifically, it was the whistle pattern of a Baldwin II 80 locomotive, which is what the Rocky Fork used for freight operations. 3 tones, descending. I'd recognize that sound anywhere." Johansen walked toward Broadway Avenue, following the sound. He heard the rhythmic clatter of wheels on rail joints, a distinctive pattern created by the gaps between track sections, which produces a regular clicking sound as each wheel passes over each joint. "The spacing was right for 40-foot rail sections," he said. "That's what they used on the Rocky Fork. The sound was moving south to north, which would be the direction of a train heading from the mines toward the junction. And it was moving at about 25 miles per hour, based on the frequency of the clicks. By the time Johansen reached Broadway Avenue, the sound had faded. He saw nothing, no locomotive, no cars, no lights. The railbed, converted to a gravel path decades earlier, was empty, but the crossing signals were different. Deputy Frank Trevino arrived at the Broadway Avenue crossing at 12:47 a.m. in response to the accumulating reports. He found a small crowd gathered near the old signals, which had been disconnected from the electrical grid since 1954 and had not functioned in living memory. The warning lights, 2 red bulbs mounted on either side of the crossbuck sign, were both burned out. The glass was intact, but the filaments inside had been destroyed, as though the bulbs had received a sudden surge of current. "I called the power company the next morning," Trevino said in a 2003 interview. "They confirmed that those signals weren't connected to anything. No wires, no transformer, no power source. The junction box had been removed in the 60s. There was no way for those bulbs to burn out because there was no way for them to turn on. The bulbs were removed and sent to the Montana Department of Transportation for analysis. The report, completed in March 2000, concluded that the filaments had failed due to electrical overload consistent with voltage exceeding rated capacity. The source of the voltage was listed as undetermined. The Carbon County Historical Society conducted an informal investigation of the incident in the summer of 2000. Researchers interviewed 14 witnesses and compiled a timeline of the reported sounds, which lasted approximately 3 minutes, consistent with the time required for a short freight train to pass through the crossing area at moderate speed. Dr. Eleanor Matsumoto, a historian specializing in Montana's railroad era, reviewed the findings and noted several points of interest. The witnesses described sounds that match historical operations on the Rocky Fork line. She said in a 2002 interview, "The whistle pattern, the wheel rhythm, the direction of travel, all consistent with a northbound freight run, which was the standard configuration for the line. If someone were staging a hoax, they would need detailed knowledge of 1940s railroad operations. That seems unlikely." When asked what alternative explanation she might offer, Matsumoto hesitated. "I'm a historian, not a physicist," she said. "I can tell you what the Rocky Fork Railroad sounded like when it was running. I can tell you that the witnesses described those sounds accurately. What I can't tell you is how they heard something that stopped existing in 1953. The investigation produced one additional detail that was never explained. Among the witnesses interviewed was a 12-year-old boy named Christopher Begay, who had been walking home from a friend's house when he heard the train. Unlike the adult witnesses, who reported only sounds, Begay claimed to have seen something. "There were lights," he said, "moving along where the tracks used to be. Yellow lights, like lanterns. And I saw shapes in the windows. People, I think. They were waving." Begay's account was noted but not included in the Historical Society's final summary, which focused on the acoustic evidence. Wilfred Johansen died in 2006 at the age of 88. In his final years, he returned often to the subject of the New Year's Eve train, discussing it with anyone who would listen. "People think I'm telling ghost stories," he said in a 2004 interview. But I'm not. I'm telling you what I heard. I spent 36 years on the railroad. I know the difference between a real train and a recording, between a steam whistle and a car horn. What passed through Red Lodge that night was a Baldwin 280 locomotive, probably number 47 or 48, based on the whistle tone. Both of those engines were scrapped in 1947. He paused, looking out the window toward Broadway Avenue. I've asked myself 1,000 times where that train was going. It was headed north, toward the junction, toward Laurel, toward the rest of the world. But the tracks are gone. There's nowhere for it to go. He was quiet for a long moment. Unless it wasn't going somewhere, unless it was coming back. The crossing signals at Broadway Avenue and 8th Street were removed in 2011 as part of a downtown beautification project. The burned-out bulbs were not preserved. The junction box location is now a flower bed. No trains have been reported in Red Lodge since 1999. But every New Year's Eve, a few residents of the town still pause at midnight, listening for the whistle 3 tones, descending like a question that was never answered. The tracks are gone. The trains are gone. But something, perhaps, is still running on schedule. 14 people signed the register, but only one hand held the pen. Woodbine Falls drops nearly 500 feet in a series of cascades along Woodbine Creek, a tributary of the West Rosebud that originates in the snowfields below Granite Peak. The falls are accessible via a moderately strenuous 9-mile hike from the West Rosebud trailhead, passing through lodgepole pine forest, subalpine meadows, and boulder fields deposited by glaciers that retreated 10,000 years ago. In summer, the trail sees steady traffic from day hikers and backpackers. In winter, the route is buried under snow and ice, impassable to all but the most determined visitors. The Forest Service maintains trail registers at several locations throughout the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness, including a wooden box mounted on a post approximately 1/4 mile from Woodbine Falls. The registers serve multiple purposes: tracking visitor numbers for management planning, providing a record for search and rescue operations, and offering hikers a place to document their journeys. Most entries are mundane names, dates, hometowns, brief comments about weather or wildlife. The register near Woodbine Falls was installed in 1992, replacing an older box that had been damaged by a fallen tree. It is checked by wilderness rangers during routine summer patrols, but is typically inaccessible from November through May. The register book is replaced annually, with completed volumes archived at the Custer-Gallatin National Forest headquarters in Bozeman. On January 2, 2018, a cross-country skier named Henrik Nygaard reached the register while completing an unsupported winter traverse of the Beartooth Range. He opened the box expecting to find blank pages. The register had not been checked since the previous September, and discovered 14 entries dated December 31, 2017. All 14 entries followed the same format: a name, a hometown, and the date. No comments, no departure times, no indication of intended destination. The names were Alice Pemberton of Duluth, Thomas Whitehorse of Hardin, Margaret Kowalski of Chicago, Samuel Okonkwo of Minneapolis, Catherine Redhorse of Crow Agency, William Lindgren of Seattle, Dorothy Matsumoto of San Francisco, Robert Gustafson of Red Lodge, Helen Nakashima of Portland, Frederick Johansson of Missoula, Elizabeth Moreau of New Orleans, James Blackwood of Denver, Patricia Santos of Albuquerque, George Halverson of Fargo. Nygaard photographed the pages and continued his traverse. When he reached cell service 3 days later, he reported the entries to the Stillwater County Sheriff's Office, noting that the presence of 14 hikers at a remote trailhead on New Year's Eve seemed unusual. The response he received was not what he expected. Deputy Sarah Coolidge pulled the backcountry permit records for December 2017 and found no permits issued for the Woodbine Falls area during the final week of the year. She cross-referenced the 14 names against national databases of missing persons, registered hikers, and wilderness fatalities. None of the names appeared in any system. That's not necessarily unusual, Coolidge said in a 2019 interview. Not everyone files permits, especially day hikers. But 14 people, all on the same day, all using the same remote register in winter conditions? That would require a coordinated group effort. Someone would have known about it? Coolidge contacted outdoor recreation organizations, hiking clubs, and social media groups throughout the region. No one reported organizing a New Year's Eve hike to Woodbine Falls. No one recognized the names. The register book was retrieved by helicopter in late March 2018 after snowmelt made ground access possible. It was sent to the Montana State Crime Lab in Missoula for forensic analysis. The findings, released in August 2018, raised more questions than they answered. Dr. Vivian Ostrowski, a forensic document examiner with 23 years of experience, conducted the handwriting analysis. Her conclusions were unambiguous. All 14 entries were written by the same individual, she said in her report. The letter formations, pen pressure, baseline consistency, and spacing patterns are identical across all samples. This is not a case of similar handwriting or familial resemblance. One person wrote all 14 names. When asked about the possibility that 14 different people had used identical handwriting by coincidence, Ostrowski dismissed the idea. Handwriting is as unique as a fingerprint, she said. The probability of 14 unrelated individuals producing identical script is effectively zero. Someone sat at that register and wrote 14 entries using 14 different names on December 31st. The ink analysis produced an additional anomaly. The ink is iron gall-based, Ostrowski reported. It's consistent with fountain pen ink, manufactured by the Parker Pen Company between approximately 1945 and 1963. This formulation was discontinued when Parker transitioned to modern ballpoint-compatible inks. It would be extremely difficult to obtain today. A vintage pen collector in Billings confirmed Ostrowski's assessment. The ink, known commercially as Parker Quink, in the blue-black permanent formula, had not been manufactured in over 50 years. The Forest Service conducted an internal review of the incident in September 2018. The review noted several additional irregularities that had not been included in the crime lab report. First, the entries appeared on pages 17 through 19 of the register book. Pages 1 through 16 contained normal entries from the previous summer, ending with a September 14th notation from a backpacker named Rosa Villarreal. Pages 17 through 19 had been blank when Villarreal signed in. Second, the register box showed no signs of tampering. The lock was intact, and the hinges displayed normal wear consistent with legitimate use. Whoever made the entries had either possessed a key or opened the box through some other means that left no trace. Third, and most troubling, a review of archived register books from previous years revealed that the same 14 names had appeared before. Wilderness Ranger Colleen Fitzgerald made the discovery while conducting a routine inventory of stored materials at the Bozeman Archive in October 2018. She found entries for Alice Pemberton, Thomas Whitehorse, Margaret Kowalski, and the 11 others in register books from 1996, 2004, and 2011, always dated December 31st, always in the same handwriting, always using the same discontinued ink. The 1996 entries had been noted at the time, but attributed to a group of winter campers who had failed to file permits. No follow-up investigation was conducted. "I've been with the Forest Service for 15 years, Fitzgerald said in a 2019 interview. "I've seen hoaxes, I've seen pranks, I've seen people write fake names to avoid permit requirements. But this is different. Whoever is doing this has been doing it for at least 22 years, using the same names, the same handwriting, the same ink that hasn't been manufactured since Kennedy was president." She paused. "And they're doing it in a location that's essentially unreachable in winter. That's the part I can't get past. How do you get to Woodbine Falls on December 31st without leaving any tracks?" Henrik Nygaard, the skier who discovered the 2018 entries, has returned to the Woodbine Falls Register on 3 subsequent occasions in the summers of 2019, 2020, and 2021. Each time, he found only normal entries from seasonal hikers. But in 2022, he made one final trip in early January, skiing the same route he had taken 4 years earlier. The register contained 7 new entries dated December 31st. The names were different this time: Arthur Lindquist of Spokane, Mary Blackfeather of Lame Deer, Donald Ikeda of Bozeman, 4 others, all from cities within 500 miles of the Beartooth Range. The handwriting was identical to the previous entries. Nygaard did not photograph the pages. He did not report them to authorities. He simply closed the register box, latched it securely, and skied away. "I don't know who's writing those names," he said in a 2023 interview. "I don't know if they're living people, dead people, or names that were made up entirely. But someone is visiting that register every New Year's Eve, and they've been doing it for decades. Maybe longer." He was quiet for a moment. "The thing that bothers me most is the ink. You can fake a name. You can learn to copy handwriting. But you can't fake ink that stopped being made 60 years ago. Whoever is writing in that register isn't pretending to be from the past. They're actually from the past, and they're still signing in." The Woodbine Falls Trail Register remains in place, checked each summer by wilderness rangers who note the normal entries and file their reports. No one checks it in winter anymore. But every January, somewhere in the archive, another name waits to be discovered, written in handwriting that belongs to no one alive, using ink that no longer exists, recording a journey that no one remembers taking. 14 hikers signed in on December 31st. None of them signed out, and the register, patient and silent, continues to wait for them to return. The lake keeps time in a language no one taught it. Lake Elaine occupies a glacial cirque at an elevation of 9,400 feet in the heart of the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. A teardrop of cold water cradled between granite walls that rise another 2,000 feet on 3 sides. The lake is small by mountain standards, roughly 18 acres, with a maximum depth of 67 feet, but its isolation and pristine clarity have made it a destination for backpackers willing to undertake the 11-mile approach from the East Rosebud Trailhead. The lake was named in 1924 by a Forest Service cartographer for his daughter, who had died of influenza 6 years earlier at the age of 7. The cartographer, whose name was Bernard Tollefson, never visited the lake himself. He chose it from a list of unnamed alpine features, selecting one that matched the description his colleagues had provided: remote, beautiful, and almost impossible to reach. No permanent structures have ever been built at Lake Elaine. The surrounding terrain is too rugged, the access too difficult, the winters too severe. Archaeological surveys conducted in 1978 found evidence of seasonal crow encampments along the eastern shore dating back approximately 300 years, but no indication of permanent habitation. The lake, as far as anyone can determine, has never been home to anything but fish, wind, and silence. The bells were first reported on January 3, 2002. A party of 3 winter campers experienced mountaineers conducting a training expedition for a planned Denali climb reached Lake Elaine on December 30, 2001, and established a base camp on the frozen shore. The group consisted of Nathan Okoro, a 34-year-old emergency physician from Helena, Suzanne Lefebvre, a 29-year-old climbing guide from Bozeman, and Marcus Johansson, a 31-year-old software developer from Seattle. On New Year's Eve, they celebrated modestly a shared bottle of whiskey, a midnight countdown, and photographs of the stars reflected in the ice. At precisely 12 a.m., as Johansson was resetting his watch, all 3 heard a sound rising from beneath the frozen surface of the lake. "It was bells," Okoro said in a 2005 interview. Not one bell, multiple bells, different pitches, ringing in a pattern, like wind chimes, but more deliberate. More musical. They were coming from under the ice, and they lasted exactly 60 seconds. I know because I was still holding my watch when they stopped. The 3 campers discussed the sound for the remainder of the night, proposing and dismissing explanations. Ice stress was the most plausible theory. Frozen lakes often produce groaning, cracking, and occasionally ringing sounds as temperature changes cause the ice to expand and contract. But Lefebvre, who had spent 7 winters guiding in Alaska, had never heard ice produce anything like what they experienced. "Ice stress is random," she said in a 2006 interview. "Pops, cracks, sometimes a deep boom like a cannon shot, what we heard was structured. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end. It sounded like music, and it lasted exactly 1 minute. Ice doesn't do that." The group returned to Lake Elaine the following New Year's Eve, equipped with audio recording equipment borrowed from a friend at Montana State University. They captured 37 minutes of ambient sound beginning at 11:45 p.m. At 12 a.m., the bells began. The recording, which has been analyzed by 3 separate audio engineers over the past 2 decades, clearly captures a sequence of high-pitched tones lasting 58 seconds. The tones are consistent with glass wind chimes, specifically chimes tuned to a pentatonic scale in the key of G major. The pattern repeats 3 times during the 60-second window, suggesting a loop or cycle of approximately 20 seconds. "It's not natural," said Dr. Ingrid Solheim, an acoustician at the University of Montana, who analyzed the recording in 2008. "The frequency distribution is too regular, the intervals too precise. Whatever is producing this sound, it's not geology, it's not wildlife. It's something designed to make music." Solheim attempted to identify the source location using waveform analysis. Her findings were inconclusive, but suggestive. "The sound appears to originate from a depth of approximately 40 to 50 feet, she said. That would place it near the deepest part of the lake. But sonar surveys conducted in 2004 show nothing at that depth except sediment and granite bedrock. There's no structure, no debris field, no object that could produce these tones." The Montana Department of Environmental Quality conducted a comprehensive survey of Lake Elaine in August 2004 as part of a broader study of alpine water quality in the Beartooth Range. The survey included bathymetric mapping, sediment core sampling, and a visual inspection using a remotely operated underwater vehicle. The ROV footage, totaling 6 hours and 43 minutes, shows a lake bottom consistent with other glacial tarns in the region. Fine silt over granite, scattered boulders calved from the surrounding cliffs, and occasional organic debris from trees that fell into the water centuries ago. There are no buildings, no vehicles, no artifacts of any kind. The sediment cores revealed no anomalies. The water chemistry was unremarkable. The lake, by every measurable standard, was exactly what it appeared to be, a cold, clean, empty body of water with nothing to hide. Yet the bells continue to ring. Since 2002, the phenomenon has been documented on 7 separate occasions, always on New Year's Eve, always beginning at midnight, always lasting precisely 60 seconds. The witnesses include backcountry rangers, amateur mountaineers, and a documentary film crew from Missoula who captured the sound in 2014 while filming a project about winter wilderness survival. The filmmaker, Corinne Yazzie, described the experience in a 2016 interview. "We weren't looking for anything supernatural," she said. "We'd heard the stories, but we assumed they were exaggerated. Then midnight came, and the bells started. My sound engineer almost dropped his equipment. He said it was the clearest audio he'd ever recorded in a field environment. No distortion, no interference, just this pure, crystalline sound rising up through the ice." Yazzie's footage was never included in the final documentary. She declined to explain why. "Some things aren't meant to be entertainment," she said. "What we heard that night felt private. Sacred, maybe. Like we'd stumbled into a ceremony that wasn't for us." The Crow Nation has no recorded oral tradition specifically mentioning Lake Elaine, but Elder Raymond Birdground, when asked about the phenomenon in 2011, offered a measured response. "Our people knew these mountains long before they had English names," he said. "We knew which places welcomed visitors and which places preferred to be left alone. The high lakes were always careful places. Not dangerous, just careful. They kept their own counsel." When asked if he believed the bells were real, Birdground smiled slightly. "I believe the lake knows when the year changes," he said. "I believe it marks the occasion in its own way. Whether that way involves bells is something only the lake can answer." Nathan Okoro, the physician who first reported the bells, returned to Lake Elaine on New Year's Eve, 2019, 17 years after his initial experience. He went alone, telling no one his destination, and spent 3 nights camped on the frozen shore. In a journal entry dated January 1, 2020, he described what he heard. The bells rang at midnight, just as they did in 2001. Same pitch, same duration, same pattern. I recorded them on my phone, but when I played back the file the next morning, there was only static. The bells don't want to be captured, or maybe they don't exist in a way that technology can preserve. He continued, I've spent 17 years thinking about what's at the bottom of that lake. I've considered every rational explanation, natural acoustics, pranks, some elaborate hoax maintained for 2 decades by people with nothing better to do. None of them fit. The simplest explanation is that something under the water is ringing bells to mark the new year. The simplest explanation is also impossible. His final entry reads, I'm 61 years old. I've delivered hundreds of babies, pronounced dozens of deaths, watched time mark its passage on human bodies for 30 years. I understand that clocks and calendars are human inventions, arbitrary lines we draw across the infinite. But the bells don't know that. They ring at midnight because midnight matters. They ring for 60 seconds because 60 seconds is enough. They ring every year because every year deserves to be counted. Lake Elaine remains accessible to experienced backpackers during the summer months, though few attempt the winter approach. The Forest Service has not installed permanent recording equipment at the site, citing budget constraints and a lack of scientific justification. The bells have not been heard since 2019. But every New Year's Eve, somewhere in the wilderness, a few people make the long journey to the frozen shore. They set up their tents, check their watches, and wait for midnight. Most hear nothing but wind and ice and silence. But some, in that precise moment when one year becomes another, hear the faint shimmer of chimes rising through the darkness, a sound that should not exist, marking an occasion that the lake, somehow, has never forgotten. 60 seconds, then silence. And the water keeps its secret for another year. "14 people signed the register, but only one hand held the pen. Woodbine Falls drops nearly 500 feet in a series of cascades along Woodbine Creek, a tributary of the West Rosebud that originates in the snowfields below Granite Peak. The falls are accessible via a moderately strenuous 9-mile hike from the West Rosebud trailhead, passing through lodgepole pine forest, subalpine meadows, and boulder fields deposited by glaciers that retreated 10,000 years ago. In summer, the trail sees steady traffic from day hikers and backpackers. In winter, the route is buried under snow and ice, impassable to all but the most determined visitors. The Forest Service maintains trail registers at several locations throughout the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness, including a wooden box mounted on a post approximately 1/4 mile from Woodbine Falls. The registers serve multiple purposes: tracking visitor numbers for management planning, providing a record for search and rescue operations, and offering hikers a place to document their journeys. Most entries are mundane names, dates, hometowns, brief comments about weather or wildlife. The register near Woodbine Falls was installed in 1992, replacing an older box that had been damaged by a fallen tree. It is checked by wilderness rangers during routine summer patrols, but is typically inaccessible from November through May. The register book is replaced annually, with completed volumes archived at the Custer-Gallatin National Forest headquarters in Bozeman. On January 2, 2018, a cross-country skier named Henrik Nygaard reached the register while completing an unsupported winter traverse of the Beartooth Range. He opened the box expecting to find blank pages. The register had not been checked since the previous September, and discovered 14 entries dated December 31, 2017. All 14 entries followed the same format: a name, a hometown, and the date. No comments, no departure times, no indication of intended destination. The names were Alice Pemberton of Duluth, Thomas Whitehorse of Hardin, Margaret Kowalski of Chicago, Samuel Okonkwo of Minneapolis, Catherine Redhorse of Crow Agency, William Lindgren of Seattle, Dorothy Matsumoto of San Francisco, Robert Gustafson of Red Lodge, Helen Nakashima of Portland, Frederick Johansson of Missoula, Elizabeth Moreau of New Orleans, James Blackwood of Denver, Patricia Santos of Albuquerque, George Halverson of Fargo. Nygaard photographed the pages and continued his traverse. When he reached cell service 3 days later, he reported the entries to the Stillwater County Sheriff's Office, noting that the presence of 14 hikers at a remote trailhead on New Year's Eve seemed unusual. The response he received was not what he expected. Deputy Sarah Coolidge pulled the backcountry permit records for December 2017 and found no permits issued for the Woodbine Falls area during the final week of the year. She cross-referenced the 14 names against national databases of missing persons, registered hikers, and wilderness fatalities. None of the names appeared in any system. "That's not necessarily unusual," Coolidge said in a 2019 interview. "Not everyone files permits, especially day hikers. But 14 people all on the same day, all using the same remote register in winter conditions? That would require a coordinated group effort. Someone would have known about it?" Coolidge contacted outdoor recreation organizations, hiking clubs, and social media groups throughout the region. No one reported organizing a New Year's Eve hike to Woodbine Falls. No one recognized the names. The register book was retrieved by helicopter in late March 2018 after snowmelt made ground access possible. It was sent to the Montana State Crime Lab in Missoula for forensic analysis. The findings, released in August 2018, raised more questions than they answered. Dr. Vivian Ostrowski, a forensic document examiner with 23 years of experience, conducted the handwriting analysis. Her conclusions were unambiguous. "All 14 entries were written by the same individual," she said in her report. "The letter formations, pen pressure, baseline consistency, and spacing patterns are identical across all samples. This is not a case of similar handwriting or familial resemblance." One person wrote all 14 names. When asked about the possibility that 14 different people had used identical handwriting by coincidence, Ostrowski dismissed the idea. "Handwriting is as unique as a fingerprint," she said. "The probability of 14 unrelated individuals producing identical script is effectively zero. Someone sat at that register and wrote 14 entries using 14 different names on December 31st. The ink analysis produced an additional anomaly. The ink is iron gall-based," Ostrowski reported. "It's consistent with fountain pen ink, manufactured by the Parker Pen Company between approximately 1945 and 1963. This formulation was discontinued when Parker transitioned to modern ballpoint-compatible inks. It would be extremely difficult to obtain today." A vintage pen collector in Billings confirmed Ostrowski's assessment. The ink, known commercially as Parker Quink, in the blue-black permanent formula, had not been manufactured in over 50 years. The Forest Service conducted an internal review of the incident in September 2018. The review noted several additional irregularities that had not been included in the crime lab report. First, the entries appeared on pages 17 through 19 of the register book. Pages 1 through 16 contained normal entries from the previous summer, ending with a September 14th notation from a backpacker named Rosa Villarreal. Pages 17 through 19 had been blank when Villarreal signed in. Second, the register box showed no signs of tampering. The lock was intact, and the hinges displayed normal wear consistent with legitimate use. Whoever made the entries had either possessed a key or opened the box through some other means that left no trace. Third, and most troubling, a review of archived register books from previous years revealed that the same 14 names had appeared before. Wilderness Ranger Colleen Fitzgerald made the discovery while conducting a routine inventory of stored materials at the Bozeman Archive in October 2018. She found entries for Alice Pemberton, Thomas Whitehorse, Margaret Kowalski, and the 11 others in register books from 1996, 2004, and 2011, always dated December 31st, always in the same handwriting, always using the same discontinued ink. The 1996 entries had been noted at the time, but attributed to a group of winter campers who had failed to file permits. No follow-up investigation was conducted. "I've been with the Forest Service for 15 years, Fitzgerald said in a 2019 interview. "I've seen hoaxes, I've seen pranks, I've seen people write fake names to avoid permit requirements. But this is different. Whoever is doing this has been doing it for at least 22 years, using the same names, the same handwriting, the same ink that hasn't been manufactured since Kennedy was president." She paused. "And they're doing it in a location that's essentially unreachable in winter. That's the part I can't get past. How do you get to Woodbine Falls on December 31st without leaving any tracks?" Henrik Nygaard, the skier who discovered the 2018 entries, has returned to the Woodbine Falls Register on 3 subsequent occasions in the summers of 2019, 2020, and 2021. Each time, he found only normal entries from seasonal hikers. But in 2022, he made one final trip in early January, skiing the same route he had taken 4 years earlier. The register contained 7 new entries dated December 31st. The names were different this time: Arthur Lindquist of Spokane, Mary Blackfeather of Lame Deer, Donald Ikeda of Bozeman, 4 others, all from cities within 500 miles of the Beartooth Range. The handwriting was identical to the previous entries. Nygaard did not photograph the pages. He did not report them to authorities. He simply closed the register box, latched it securely, and skied away. "I don't know who's writing those names," he said in a 2023 interview. "I don't know if they're living people, dead people, or names that were made up entirely. But someone is visiting that register every New Year's Eve, and they've been doing it for decades. Maybe longer." He was quiet for a moment. "The thing that bothers me most is the ink. You can fake a name. You can learn to copy handwriting. But you can't fake ink that stopped being made 60 years ago. Whoever is writing in that register isn't pretending to be from the past. They're actually from the past, and they're still signing in." The Woodbine Falls Trail Register remains in place, checked each summer by wilderness rangers who note the normal entries and file their reports. No one checks it in winter anymore. But every January, somewhere in the archive, another name waits to be discovered, written in handwriting that belongs to no one alive, using ink that no longer exists, recording a journey that no one remembers taking. 14 hikers signed in on December 31st. None of them signed out, and the register, patient and silent, continues to wait for them to return. Someone raised a glass to the new year, but no one was there to drink it. Pilot Creek flows through a narrow valley in the southeastern corner of the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness, descending from the high plateaus near the Wyoming border before joining the Clark's Fork of the Yellowstone River. The drainage is remote even by wilderness standards, accessible only via a 17-mile approach from the nearest trailhead through terrain that discourages casual visitors with its steep grades, dense timber, and absence of maintained campsites. The creek takes its name from Pilot Peak, a prominent landmark used by 19th-century travelers navigating the region. Early surveyors noted that the peak was visible from multiple approach routes, making it useful for orientation in a landscape where other landmarks tended to blend together. The valley below, by contrast, offered no such visibility. It was a place to pass through, not a place to stay. Few records exist of human activity in the Pilot Creek drainage before the 20th century. The Crow Nation used the broader Clark's Fork region for seasonal hunting, but oral histories make no specific mention of the creek itself. A trapper named Cornelius Hagen built a small cabin near the confluence with the Clark's Fork in 1891, but abandoned it within 2 years, citing what he described in a letter to his brother as an unwelcoming atmosphere. The cabin collapsed sometime in the early 1900s and was never rebuilt. The Forest Service conducts periodic surveys of the drainage as part of its wilderness monitoring program, but the area sees fewer than 50 visitors per year. Most are experienced backpackers seeking solitude, willing to trade convenience for the assurance that they will encounter no one else. On December 31st, 2016, a man named Elliot Sandoval was camped alone on a small bench above Pilot Creek, approximately 8 miles from the nearest trail junction. Sandoval was 37 years old, a software architect from Portland who had been backpacking in the Northern Rockies for over a decade. He was methodical and well-prepared, carrying a GPS unit that logged his position and movement every 30 seconds, a satellite messenger for emergency communication, and sufficient supplies for a 6-day solo traverse of the wilderness. He had chosen the Pilot Creek drainage specifically because of its isolation. In a blog post written before his departure, he described his intention to spend New Year's Eve in the quietest place I could find. He succeeded. What he found there was something else entirely. According to Sandoval's account, provided in a detailed written statement to the Carbon County Sheriff's Office on January 4, 2017, he set up camp on December 30th and spent the following day exploring the upper drainage. He returned to his tent at approximately 5 p.m. on December 31st, ate dinner, and went to sleep around 8:30 p.m., having decided not to stay awake for midnight. He woke at 12:03 a.m. on January 1st, 2017. He remembered the time because he checked his watch immediately with an awareness that something was different. The night was silent, the sky clear, the temperature approximately 15 degrees below zero. Beside his tent, resting upright in the snow approximately 18 inches from the vestibule, was a champagne glass. "I thought I was dreaming at first," Sandoval wrote in his statement. "I unzipped the tent and touched it to make sure it was real. The glass was cold, freezing cold, but there was liquid inside. Champagne, or something that looked like champagne. And there was a lipstick mark on the rim. Dark red. Fresh." Sandoval photographed the glass using his phone, then examined the surrounding snow. He found no footprints, no ski tracks, no evidence that anyone had approached his campsite. The snow was undisturbed in every direction for at least 50 yards. His GPS log, which he downloaded after returning to Portland, confirmed his account. The device showed no movement within 30 meters of his tent between 7:43 p.m. on December 31st and 5:22 a.m. on January 1st, when Sandoval woke again and began packing his gear. "I didn't sleep after I found the glass," he wrote. "I just sat in my tent, watching the door, waiting for someone to appear. No one did. When the sun came up, I hiked out as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I reached my car." Dr. Miriam Ostrowski, a professor of material science at Oregon State University, examined the glass at Sandoval's request in February 2017. Her analysis confirmed that the crystal was genuine lead glass of exceptional quality, with a lead oxide content of approximately 32% consistent with luxury glassware from the early 20th century. The pattern in Art Deco design featuring geometric etchings around the base was traced to a manufacturer in Vienna called Lobmeyer, which had produced a limited series of champagne coupes between 1924 and 1931. The pattern, known as Mitternacht or Midnight, was created to commemorate the company's centennial and was discontinued after fewer than 500 pieces were made. "These glasses are exceptionally rare," Ostrowski said in a 2018 interview. "Most were destroyed during the Second World War or lost during the subsequent decades. Complete sets have sold at auction for tens of thousands of dollars. Finding one in a wilderness area, filled with champagne, is not something I can explain." The lipstick mark was analyzed by a forensic chemist at a private laboratory in Seattle. The pigment was identified as carmine-based, consistent with formulations used in the 1920s and 30s. No modern lipstick manufacturer produces an exact match. "Whoever left that mark was wearing vintage cosmetics," the chemist noted in her report. "Either authentic 1930s lipstick, which would be almost impossible to obtain in usable condition, or a precise reproduction that doesn't exist on the commercial market." The Carbon County Sheriff's Office opened an investigation into the incident in January 2017, treating it as a potential case of harassment or stalking. Deputy Marcus Johansson interviewed Sandoval by phone and reviewed the GPS data, photographs, and laboratory reports. "I couldn't find any evidence of a crime, Johansson said in a 2019 interview. No one was harmed, nothing was stolen, and Mr. Sandoval had no known enemies or stalkers. But I also couldn't find any evidence of how that glass got there. The GPS data was clean. The snow showed no disturbance. Either someone approached that campsite without leaving any trace, or the glass appeared through means I don't understand. Johansson contacted the Forest Service to inquire about other visitors in the Pilot Creek drainage during the relevant period. Permit records showed no backcountry permits issued for the area between December 15, 2016, and January 15, 2017. Satellite imagery, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, showed no heat signatures or movement in the valley during the night in question. The investigation was suspended in March 2017 due to lack of actionable leads. Elliot Sandoval returned to the Pacific Northwest and resumed his normal life, but he continued to research the incident privately. In 2018, he contacted a collector of antique glassware in Vienna who confirmed the authenticity and rarity of the Lobmere Mitternacht pattern. He told me that only 3 complete sets are known to exist, Sandoval said in a 2020 interview. All 3 are in private collections in Europe. None have been sold or transferred since the 1980s. If the glass I found is genuine, it shouldn't exist outside those collections. The collector also shared one additional detail that Sandoval found disturbing. He said the Mitternacht pattern was designed specifically for New Year's Eve celebrations, Sandoval recounted. The name means midnight. The glasses were intended to be used for the midnight toast, the moment when one year becomes another. Whoever placed that glass knew exactly what it was meant for. Sandoval has not returned to the Pilot Creek drainage since 2016. He sold most of his backpacking equipment in 2019 and has largely stopped visiting wilderness areas. I spent years trying to understand what happened that night, he said. I've considered every explanation an elaborate prank, a hallucination, some kind of experimental technology that can approach without leaving traces. None of them fit. The glass was real. The lipstick was real. The champagne was real. I could smell it, taste it. Someone was there, someone who wanted me to know they were celebrating. He paused. The thing I can't stop thinking about is the lipstick mark. Someone pressed their lips to that glass. Someone made a toast. But the champagne was still inside. They didn't drink it. It was like they were waiting for me to join them. Like the toast wasn't finished. The champagne glass remains in Sandoval's possession, stored in a safety deposit box in Portland. He has declined multiple offers from collectors, including one for $12,000 from a buyer in Switzerland. I don't want to sell it, he said. I don't even want to look at it, but I can't bring myself to throw it away. It feels like evidence. Evidence of what? I don't know, but evidence of something. Pilot Creek continues to flow through its remote valley, unmarked by any memorial or warning sign. The bench where Sandoval camped shows no indication of what occurred there, just another patch of wilderness, indistinguishable from 1,000 others. But every New Year's Eve, somewhere in the world, the remaining Lobmere Mitternacht glasses sit in their display cases, unused. All except one. One was raised in a wilderness where no one should have been, left beside a sleeping stranger, filled with champagne that was never drunk and marked by lips that left no footprints in the snow. The toast was offered. The invitation remains open. And somewhere in the frozen silence of Pilot Creek, the new year arrived on schedule, witnessed by someone or something that has never been identified.